shall we say the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Welcome to the May 8th Ways and Means meeting. Is there anyone here for public comments? Seeing none?
Just a motion to adjourn?
Tom, you're up.
Second.
All right, we have a number of warrant articles to go through, and I guess if there are no suggestions to rearrange the agenda, we'll just start at the top. The first one was item number 2 on the warrant, transfer of funds. And David, you have an update on that?
Yes, so that is actually being withdrawn. There have been some law changes that allow us to make omnibus transfers. We usually do it before, in our last meeting, and do it at town meeting. The laws have changed that allow municipalities to close the books after the fiscal year end by a vote of the Ways and Means only. So we will do that per our meeting in July. August, so it is being.
Which means we will have to have
A
a meeting
meeting
at
in
that,
July.
something around there.
I believe we're supposed to have a meeting in July to do reorganization, but
Yeah.
we've been rather fluid about the
Right.
timing. Great. All right, item number 16, the approval of the school transportation contracts. John, you're up for that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a little bit of background on that. So Susan had sent around an email with the both the bid for the new contract that the school committee has accepted, and an analysis of from Ms. Kasha on how that translates into budget increases. So just to be clear, the intent here is that the increase will be folded into both the operating and accommodated account. So just stepping back a little bit, the original guideline, as you know, was 3.5% overall, split to 3.25% on the town side and 3.75% for the school. So outside of that, by agreement, because the transportation contract was being rebid this year, the increase in the transportation contract was considered to be outside of that guideline. So the school did meet the guideline for both accommodated and operating budgets. And then the contract that bids did come in for the transportation contract. Unfortunately, there was only one bid because apparently as we understand, the other bidders were essentially discouraged that they could not meet or did not feel they could meet what A&F, who is the incumbent, what they anticipated the bid would be coming in there. So that is the bid that the school committee voted to accept, since they didn't have a lot of alternatives. Our understanding, so there was a consultant hired who gave advice in both creating the bid specification and going through the bid process. From not knowing a lot about this, but from my point of view, the couple interesting things that he suggested putting in there were adding a COLA for the contract that's based on the CPI increase from the start of the contract, and putting in a fuel price adjustment based on average fuel prices, essentially. The intent of putting those in was to remove some of the uncertainty from the vendor's point of view and taking that risk on ourselves, with the hope that that would lead to lower bids. Now, of course, you have no idea if it was successful in that or not, but it seemed like a good idea, certainly. So where did that end up? So the day rates on the buses, the bid relative to our current contract is an increase of anywhere between 22 and 28% on the bus day rates. And there are different rates based on different kind of buses and so forth. So that's pretty substantial. Our consultant has told us that, he works with a lot of different districts. Of the 30 districts that he has knowledge of in terms of what their recent contracts in just the last year or so are, he described the rates that we got as being in the bottom 3 out of the 30 districts that he knows about. So as painful as an increase this might be, apparently it could have been a lot worse. So there's something to be happy about. If you compare the increase relative to the previous contract, it's an $821,000 increase. But because we were operating at a higher service level with extra buses relative to the original contract, the actual increase we saw was not as large as that. So another factor that went into the increase is that previously we had bus monitors on the special ed buses that we were paying as employees. And that was sucking down a lot of time managing that whole process of hiring them and making sure that we had the right number available and so forth. Apparently the norm is to have the bus companies hire and deal with all the bus monitors, and that's what happened in this new contract also. So that's been folded into the contract, whereas previously that had been a separate line item in the school budget. So if you look at the spreadsheet from Ms. Kasha, you'll see a breakdown of exactly how the increases were arrived at. But the net of it is that there is a $709,000 increase in our transportation costs relative to last year, doing an apples to apples comparison. And that increase has been split between the operating budget and the accommodated account budget. So the operating budget increase is, so now these increases are relative to the school budget amounts that we voted on previously. So we're basically we're going to make a recommendation, or subcommittee is making a recommendation to adjust those numbers to have a new operating budget and new accommodated account budget that we vote on tonight. So in particular, if we look, and let me get the exact numbers here. If we look at, and you'll see this on the summary of Ms. Kasha's spreadsheet. If we look at the operating budget, it came in a guideline at 3.75%. That, because of the transportation contract increase, went up by $310,392 to a new operating budget of $53,604,348 for an overall 4.35% increase. Again, I want to emphasize that the original budget included a level funded amount for the transportation services. So the increase is strictly the increase in the transportation budget, not the entire transportation budget. And then the second number would be the accommodated budget, which has an increase of $399,283 for a total budget of $12,098,391, or 10.23% increase relative to last year. Again, that would have been 6.59 without this increase. That was considered outside of the guidelines. So I'd like to move that we vote to approve the operating budget for the school, new operating budget for a school of $53,604,348.
Technically, I don't know. Are we just voting? This is the part I'm not clear on.
So, he made a motion, we'll need to discuss it.
Sorry. So
If
do
you
you
can
want me to?
get, if you can get a second, we
Oh.
can keep going.
Oh, sorry. Well, second, do you want Nicole and Bob to come up to?
I have a couple of questions.
And then we
can
have
talk about
questions.
it.
I thought there might be discussion.
Where do you want to start, Steve?
I
And
have,
Nicole.
I guess I have a couple of questions. One, the traffic supervisor position is eliminated. What was the traffic supervisor's role and how does that impact the overall operations?
Where are you looking on this?
I'm sorry, it's in FY19 it was crossed out. I guess in FY20 it's crossed out, so it wasn't in FY19 either?
Oh, so, on that sheet on page 1,
Yeah.
the top line there.
Traffic supervisor, yeah.
Yep, so this expense is separate from the bid, but it is included in the operating budget. I just showed it there so that everyone could see the total for 19 that's carried.
Oh, I see, okay.
But
so-
it didn't have anything to do with, there was no impact on that line item because of the transportation bid.
Got it. Okay, that's what I was getting confused by. So there's still a traffic supervisor there. And just from the number of trips perspective, this is the same number of trips we made this year with the same number of buses? Compared to FY19 to FY20?
So the only thing that's changed in this bid as far as last year's services is there's an increase in one after-school bus.
Okay. So it's apples to apples with the exception of one after-school bus?
Versus existing services from last year, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, one of the things you had said something about extra buses, and you kind of floated past it. Is there why do we have extra buses?
Let me just be a little clear. When I say extra buses, the original contract we're in the third year of a contract now?
5.
Fifth year. So relative to the first year that it was bid, we are running more buses than were in the bid 5 years ago. And Mr. Kuna can explain why that would be.
So our daytime buses was bid with 18, and we currently use 18 buses. Our after-school buses and our special ed buses had changed from the bid, where it was bid with 9 and went to 11, and then our after-school buses went from 2 to 4. That's where the difference is. The number of field trips and music trips had changed from the original 430 to 450, again, over the 5 years. So what you're seeing now is what our current status is.
One more question, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Tom.
And on the revised sheet that we have, it says revised March 29th, 2019. Could you explain what B, the section B means? It says something about late buses, but it's not clear. What does it mean?
Let's talk about the bid document.
Oh, on this?
Bid Form 1?
I think it's,
Yeah, bid form 1.
I think this is the late buses that they offer students who stay after school for help during the day.
Okay.
So they run an hour or two later, so that way they can
Is that what it is?
participate in
Yeah.
extracurricular
That
activities.
is exactly the clarification. So the middle school uses 3 buses, and the high school uses 1 bus.
Okay. Is there any demand on the bus company, or is there a penalty if their buses arrive late? Is there anything involved with that at all? I know some contracts, there's been discussion, I know Boston has that. I was just wondering, do we have any demands to make sure that the buses are on time?
We don't have a penalty per se, but we have a clause in the contract for 30 minutes that if a bus is either broken down or can't meet that expectation, again, unless there's an act of God or traffic or something beyond their control, that they would dispatch another bus. But we don't penalize them for being 2 minutes to 5 minutes late, no.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, is this a 40% increase? Am I missing something here? From 1.6 million to 2.3 million?
Which one are you looking at here?
Total increase.
I'm not sure which sheet you're looking at here, Bob.
Looking at school
Or,
transportation, transportation FY .20 budget. It says FY '19 was 1.2,
Okay, yeah. So,
it was 400, so that's 1.648, right? 1,648,000 up to 2,323,000? That's a 40% increase.
yeah, it's about 37% if I recall correctly, but close enough. So, yes, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that we've got this collection of well, obviously, in terms of apples to apples, the increase was, if I recall correctly, on the order of about 28%. In terms of the increase that you would see due to the day rate. Then the additional increase, let me see if, make sure I can reconstruct this. The performance bond would be an additional increase item. And let's see here. The monitors were included, in terms of the math here, the monitors are included in both. But yeah, it's a huge increase.
And we could, with a 37% increase in the budget, we couldn't find another bus company to bid this?
There was only one bid.
Yeah, we sent it out to literally 35 vendors.
And, Bob, you have any idea what a school bus costs?
I'm sorry,
What the cost of a bus is?
between 85 and 100 to buy it.
So for 1.6 million, we could have a fleet of buses, right? 18 buses. I mean, we're getting to a point where it makes sense for us to own our own buses.
You gotta pay the drivers.
Yeah, there is,
Yeah, okay, so I mean, 1.6 for 20 buses, right? I mean, that leaves us another $700,000 to pay 20 bus drivers. I mean, you know, this is exorbitant, this is ridiculous.
you can absolutely make the argument that we should get into the bus business. It's, you know, most schools probably aren't qualified to do that. I would argue we don't want to be in that business either. If the consultant is to be believed, we're at the bottom end of 30 districts. So either all these bus companies are making money hand over fist, or this is unfortunately what it costs. I know part of what they described as the increases are a number of state mandates that increase the driver costs in particular. So I know there was a requirement for time off, a requirement for various training. So there's a number of state mandates that did increase that rate. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt it's a large, disappointing increase. I can't argue with you on that. I don't think we want to get into the bus business, though.
Well, I think it's worthwhile to take a look at what the cost comparison would be if this is, how do we know it's not going to be up 30% next year?
Well, this is a five-year
This is a
contract.
five-year deal.
This is a 5-year contract.
But I thought we were in the fifth year. Oh, so we're
We
writing-
are,
Okay,
we
I
are
misunderstood.
finishing the 5th year of our current contract, which was extended from 3 years, if I recall correctly. Because we had such a good deal, we extended our previous contract by 2 years, so we're able to keep that up. But that contract is finishing. This will be a contract for the next 5 years, assuming the town meeting approves the making of a 5-year contract.
So for 5 years, we're almost at $12 million without any escalation.
Uh,
Cost of living.
Yep,
COLA.
yep, you're right. There'll be COLA and fuel increases on top of that, so, yep, that's what we're looking at.
I think we should look at being in the bus business. If it's this, if it's this lucrative.
Maybe you want to be in the bus business.
I think there's a bunch of more math to do before you jump.
Well, we're
Yes.
getting close. We should at least look at the math.
All right. Other questions? Brad?
So I'm in favor of voting this through. I mean, the only other option is that all the kids walk or have their parents drive them next year. And it sounds like this price is what it is. And again, it's about the best rate that's going out there. My question, and I wonder if I should go invite the town administrator in, I'm just wondering big picture. So we've got 700,000 on addition. Has this been modeled at all? I know during setting of guidelines, there was a guess that this was going to be a large number. I'm just wondering, has this been modeled at all, or do we have to eat, whatever, a point or half a point on the tax levy?
I don't know the number. It is raise and appropriate, so it will raise the tax levy beyond what was projected. Do you have that?
Yeah, thank you. No, I just wanted to throw one more thing in there relative to what's been discussed here. One of the other things that was done was an analysis of how can we make this less expensive. And Mr. Kuna has that report and presented it to us. Basically, with a lot of work, 65,000 could be taken out of this, but that would require reducing service levels on the buses and also changing bell schedules to allow that. So it would have been a fairly complex change that was deemed not a good trade-off. So, that's the level of I'll call it flexibility that could be had here if people were desperate to squeeze the last penny out of it. But it was deemed not a good trade-off to do that.
Other questions, Phil?
One other question, Mr. Chairman, thank you. What is the possibility of just bidding the contract for 1 year? Was that looked at?
Again, anything is possible. We didn't bid that year. The reason is that usually what happens is the bus companies like to amortize over 5 years. Any type of new purchases, any type of commitments that they need to make, including buses, insurance, things like that. And we typically have seen a better rate across the state in some of the bids that have come up in 5 years. If you wanted to take the purchase price of a new bus, like you said, for $85,000 to $100,000 and divide that over 5 years, as opposed to 3 years, then the cost of that would just increase over the 3-year bid. Knowing that there's a 5-year contract in place, it allows to amortize over more time. So again, we could, but we didn't choose that route. We chose a 5-year.
Well, my only concern is we have one bidder. I mean, if we maybe bid it for 1 or 2 years, we might get 4 or 5 bidders. And the other thing is, rather than buy buses, perhaps we could lease them. But that's a separate issue. It just, it galls me to vote for a 37% increase for.
Anybody else questions? So I've got a couple. Having been at the original meeting where the guideline was set and this issue was raised, I guess one of my questions is what can be done in terms of changing service levels to bring the cost of this down significantly?
Again, I don't know if that's really a conversation for me to answer. I mean, I think that's a school committee conversation if they would like to, discuss or entertain reducing services. As far as the number of buses, it's broken down simply to about $65,000 per bus per year, which is the number that Mr. Eiler presented to you. So if there was ever a request to reduce a bus, that's what we'd be looking at, $65,000. Again, to do that, that means obviously increasing the length of bus routes, decreasing the number of bus stops, changing the bus schedules to get in between the 3 tiers that we have right now for our bell schedules. Personally, do I believe that's a $65,000 value trade? No. But like I said, I believe that's a conversation that school committee would definitely need to entertain.
Well, I think if you went to the trouble, you probably have to cut it by 3 or 4 buses to make it worthwhile.
Right. Yeah, 65
And,
is peanuts, really, in this. Yeah. Not that
So,
it's.
okay, so are we committed to this contract for 5 years?
We have not committed to it yet until we have approval from town meeting.
And can the number of buses be changed during the tenure of the contract?
So technically, yeah, 25% up or down.
Okay. So if somebody put some time into it, there actually are some savings that could be achieved during the life of the contract. We're not locked into exactly the.
25% of the total cost of the contract.
Right.
This is not a separate line item, Mr. Chairman. This is in the general, this is in the overall.
What, as proposed, with, right, it ends up being in the bottom line of the school committee budget. Right.
But it's,
Do you have another question?
My,
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
my understanding is that
because there's no separate warrant article for this increase, and it is an operating budget item, that's why it's being proposed as an amended budget, as opposed to a separate item. At this point, I don't think there's an option to have a separate article for it.
Right, given that and I think also given that it was printed in the warrant at the current amount, there will need to be a motion to change it.
Well, you'll make the main motion.
I guess
for
we'll
this
maybe,
amount.
if we pass this here, we'll be making a main motion at a higher amount. Okay, anything else? Tom?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you aware of any communities that don't bus their children to school?
No.
The parking lot's not big enough.
You're treading on dangerous ground.
Belmont doesn't.
Belmont doesn't.
Littleton.
Have a third
Boston, I don't think does. You said Boston. I think they use the T. I mean, kids can use the T if they want.
If we put this money into the Burlington transportation system,
Beeline rides ago.
Lexington stopped when they, with the Express.
Express.
That's called, they stopped.
No, I'm just curious as to whether or not those communities that don't bus their kids to school, what have been the repercussions? You know, not to be the old fart, but there was no busing when I was a kid going to school, when I went to Somerville schools. And, you know, it was 1.5 miles to walk to the high school. So what? Just walk, you know. I understand traffic was a lot less. And, you know, I'm just wondering, what are the absolute repercussions for not busing the kids?
yeah, I mean, Belmont has the MBTA, so
You don't.
they have some alternatives. Yes, would you like to put in a word here? Thank you, Christine Monaco.
Chris, you telling us you're gonna open up a taxi company? Is that what you're saying?
That'd be a good idea, wouldn't it? I just wanted to point out a couple of things. We had a great 5-year contract, and we knew this was coming. That's why when we had the budget guideline meeting, Eric was very careful to make it clear that we needed the delta in the transportation costs outside of the guideline, because we knew this was going to be a big hit, given a 5-year contract on such good terms. I also wanted to point out, I was just as shocked as everybody else when I saw the increase, and it took a while to assimilate it. But I think it's important to note that our enrollments are increasing. They've increased over 5 years. They're increasing into the future. All of the data points to more and more students. And look around town, you'll see why. In addition to that, we have programmatic changes that have necessitated more buses, like you mentioned, I don't know who mentioned, the music program and field trips. And so all of these busing needs are very real. In addition to that, if you think about it, we have 3 children to a seat on every elementary school bus. Not 2, 3. There are 3 kids squished in every one of these seats. So, I just wanted to make the point that I know it costs a lot, but that's what we do. We teach kids, we bus them to school, and we've got to fit them in those buses. Just a little, my opinion.
All right, John.
Just to address Tom directly on his question, though, I think the repercussion is that people have come to expect this as one of the services we provide, and, we could probably save a lot of money by getting rid of trash collection also. I'm guessing it would be a similar kind of reaction, that this is what people have come to expect, and we could require all the parents to, have their kids walk or drive them, but I think that's a much bigger mindset change that we're looking for, that wouldn't be well-received, most likely. I think that would be a big challenge.
I don't know that especially the elementary schools, or even the middle school, has the bandwidth to have every parent dropping off their kids. The traffic around, especially Memorial and the middle school, would be a nightmare if we didn't have buses bringing in big groups of kids and had all individual cars coming. It would be awful.
And plus, we've heard quite a bit about the sidewalks in some areas not being in good enough shape, especially around Marshall Simons, it would present a safety issue.
All right, anything further? David?
But I'm sure analysis is being done as far as number of people that are utilizing the buses on a daily basis. So that's the other thing. It's just, again, and it's not just periodically. I mean, I don't know if there's attendance on the bus, not per se attendance, but the utilization of such is important because, again, you see the high school, yes, I don't think there are a lot of high school kids that are using the bus. And 3 in elementary schools, yeah, I mean, that's packed. So maybe there's a way to think outside the box and figure out different routes for different schools or ones that are being used versus not. We're covering the whole town, no questions, and the enrollment is going up, but does that translate to people using the buses?
But just briefly, if I could touch on that, Chair.
Yeah, sure.
I think I hear a lot that in the afternoon that the buses are not to full capacity. In some of our preliminary explorations of that, we kind of see about a 60% in the afternoon. Obviously, there's a lot of events happening in the afternoon and so forth. The other thing too is that we pay a day rate on the bus. So if I'm a bus company, I want to tie up my bus for the whole entire day, not just for 2 hours. So the day rate that we pay, if we were to eliminate the afternoon 9 high school buses, we don't save half the money because the bus is already tied up for 3/4 of the day anyways. So really what we would save is about an hour's worth of a bus driver's time in salary, but not the day rate of the bus. The other thing too is that because we're utilizing the 18 buses in a 3-tier system, we use the 18 buses all at the middle school, 18 buses all at 3 elementaries, and then we use the 18 buses at an elementary and a high school. So in the afternoon, that same tier happens, where we have about a 75 to 80% utilization in the elementary, 75 to 80% utilization in the middle school, and then once we get to that high school, we see that drop off in the afternoon. But again, even for those 9 kids that are riding that high school bus in the afternoon, let's say that one single bus or 18 kids on a bus, we don't get a discounted rate. It would actually cost us more to swap out to a minibus because now they have to find a minibus and bring that over here when they've already tied up that high school bus and given us a daily rate on it.
So
like
we're
I said-
using, I'm sorry.
No, I just meant that the potential to save, an hour's worth of a salary here or so forth is minimal to say, let's eliminate a bus in the afternoon. Because like I said, we get that daily rate anyways.
So those are the planned trips. But can you capitalize that with some of the sporting events, some of the field trip events? And you're going to have those on a consistent basis. Are those extra buses and not part of the daily trip buses that you swap out for the buses in the afternoon because of those are going to be the sports or the field trip buses for the latter part? Again, trying to think outside the box.
So what would happen is in the afternoon, let's say 9 buses go to Francis Wyman, which is what happens when they're done with that route, then they'll circle back and then become the afternoon routes for either field trips and or late buses. So again, it still comes back to that one bus being tied up for that day rate. And then what happens is instead of going home at 2:50 in the afternoon when their day should be over, it gets extended for that extra hour just to cover that extra either field trip or late bus.
Phil?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Tom's question, I can't abide by the thought of a 7 or 8-year-old walking in all kinds of weather to a school, particularly in these times. That doesn't make any sense. But I can't vote for locking us into a 5-year deal from these guys who look like they're confiscatory with this kind of a number. It just doesn't make any sense to me to lock in with these guys for 5 years, so I can't vote for this.
Other comments? Brad?
But it's not them. I mean, that the prices have gone up. I mean, they said it's one of the 3 best deals in the area. It's frustrating, I know, but the costs have gone up. So I am supporting it. Thank you.
All right, Stephen?
So I guess the question is, if we approve this 5-year, do we have the option to cancel after say the first year if we come up with some kind of alternative? We're committing to 5 years.
It wouldn't be what I consider the best practice for us to back out of the contract. There are some provisions in there that could potentially allow us to,
Okay.
but that's not the intent of going out to bid to provide services, from our point of view and from the vendor's point of view when they put their bid in. So I wouldn't support that personally.
No, that makes sense.
Well, the legal implications would be
It's not practical.
in excess of whatever money we thought we were gonna save.
Yeah. Christine?
We hired the consultant to come up with the best plan, and in order to have a 5-year contract, town meeting has to give us the okay, because the limit is generally 3 years. But the whole purpose for the 5-year contract was to get the best price. And if you were to rebid this thing as a 3-year or a 1-year, it wouldn't be this price. It would be more money.
No, it makes sense. I was just trying to
Well, we
understand.
don't know that. Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. We don't know that. We have one bidder for a 5-year contract. If we had a 1-year or 2-year, we might have 10 bidders.
So, according to the consultant, and we have taken a lot of advice from him, John, you might want to help me out with this, but it wasn't that, yes, there was only one bid, but there were other people, how did they came back to the, yeah, you explain it.
So, during the bid, it went out to 35 vendors. When we had our first bidders meeting, 5 vendors showed up and asked questions. When it came back to actually submit a bid, 3 vendors showed up. 1 vendor actually submitted paperwork, and the other 2 vocalized and said that they would not be able to touch the prices without even knowing what the other person had bid yet, just given the rates. These are public record right here, so these aren't made-up numbers, but there's 46 contracts that have all been bid in the past 2 years, everywhere from Newton to Billerica to Bedford to Melrose, and it has their contract rates on it. I can obviously share this with everyone. John in Ways and Means has seen that. So when we say we're the lowest, yes, there are 2 people that do have lower numbers. There are 6 people that have existing contracts that expire next year that have lower than us. We had one of the best rates in the state in the contract that we're in right now at $285 a day. We would love to continue that. We would love to extend that for 5 more years. It's not an option for us right now. And even going with a new 5-year contract, looking at what's been bid, is there a long shot that somebody could beat that? Sure. Is it likely? Not really, given the numbers that are out there. And not really by $1 or $2, probably more of a $40 increase from what these numbers are showing.
All right, shall we vote?
Make a motion?
There is a motion on the
I'll
floor.
second.
And it's seconded, so all in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? 8-2-0, right? Did I count that right, Steve?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Before, if I may, that was the operating
The operating
budget.
budget, okay.
We now have the accommodated budget.
Right,
Just to refresh your memory, the accommodated budget is covering the 2 things, the special education transportation and what I think Dr. Kine has described as extended year services, so the summer transportation, which is also special ed, I guess? Yeah. So the motion is to approve a new accommodated budget for the schools of $12,098,391.
right, so these revise our previous approvals of the bottom lines of the school budget, operating and accommodated.
Exactly.
This one's
So we just voted on the revised operating budget, and now I'm making a motion for a revised accommodated budget,
Probably amended, their amendments, right?
whatever the proper terminology is.
You're amending it up.
Okay. I'd like to amend the accommodated budget for the school.
All right,
Second that.
second. Further discussion? David?
So just on that spreadsheet on the back, where this line item is ultimately up from 4.8, and it included a number of items that were not in the 19 budget, monitors, bus monitors, where were those previous years?
Are you looking at page one on?
I'm looking at page one,
Okay.
the 20.
So the monitors, which I think Mr. Eiler had touched on before,
A while ago.
we previously employed the monitors in district. So this contract has the bus company hiring and assigning and managing the monitors, where previously it was in our operating budget as a salary.
So did we take that out of this year's operating
Yeah,
budget?
so we did not budget for monitors in the operating budget for salaries, knowing that it was going to be a responsibility of the vendor.
Follow up on that. So, bus monitors earlier were characterized as being on the special ed buses, so that would be part of the accommodated account, is that correct?
They were budgeted on operating in prior years,
But they were on the buses that were being used for
Yes.
special ed.
which is why, again, I did not budget them on the operating side.
You remember what that amount was?
100,000.
100,000, okay. So you're using that 100,000 for something else this year?
Yeah, well, it says 216,000 though, not 100,000. It says 216,000, so that's 216,000 in found money from last year's budget.
We spent a lot of time on this.
So it's 216,000 in found money from last year's budget, which is now being shifted into the operated budget someplace else.
No, that was in fact our concern, and why we did spend a lot of time on this, because it's easy to have the initial reaction, as I did, that, gee, it seems like you guys have found a new slush fund here, and that we're funding that. It's a little complicated to describe. When we went through the whole thing, we had whittled it down to about $30,000 that you might sort of be able to make that argument, but not really. So the reason it's confusing, and we literally had a whole meeting about this, wore Nicole out, some things, or a fair number of things in because transportation is complicated, and it's split between special ed and regular ed, the decision in the past was made to essentially to put most of it into the operating account. In reality, it's actually split between, it should have been split between accommodated and special ed. So the part that, so the increased amount, and I know this is going to sound convoluted, the increased amount is mostly in the special ed side of the ledger when you carefully parse it out. And it gets complicated because there are buses that are used sort of for one thing and sort of for another. There's buses that are a combination of uses, and how do you parse out that cost? So rather than spend all of accounting's time trying to figure out that this bus was 3/10 special ed and 7/10 regular ed, they just put it in the regular operating budget to make their lives easy, and I don't blame them. But the point is that if you carefully did that analysis and split it, how it was actually spent, I feel the increase has been properly allocated between the two, and that there isn't a secret extra increase in the operating budget as a result of this. I think, and if there was one, we're really talking 10, 20K at most, definitely not a 200K kind of thing.
I know you put a great deal of work in this. And Susan, too.
You just don't believe them.
And I accept that the way I described it was not a compelling argument.
Okay.
We could come up with a spreadsheet and actually get this down to the dollar.
You spent $210,000 in fiscal 19 budget in the operating account.
Where are you getting the 210 number from?
Well, the 210 is right here. It says monitors.
We had monitors last year. We no longer have monitors. So we paid for monitors last year. We're
Out of the
not-
operating.
We're not paying for monitors this year.
This year.
Okay, I see what you're saying. No, and the answer is, no, you're incorrect. Only because the spreadsheet is confusing, not because you read it wrong. Let me just clarify, this will make it very clear. Look down at the bottom, the correct or not the bottom, but the correct, and I had asked Nicole this exact question, which is why I know the answer. You'll see the amount for 414K in special ed transportation in town. Do you see that number on FY '20?
Yeah, that's the increase.
No. So that 414 is what was put into budget for FY '20 and was basically level funded from, or actually slightly increased from the 406 in FY '19. That 406 number in FY '19 included monitors, as I understand from Nicole. Is that correct? Yeah, so the point is, she did not break out where you see blanks on those first three. It's not that they're zero, it's that they've all been rolled into that 406 number. So the correct comparison to do is look at the 414 budget in FY '20, and that's what was actually put in the budget. And the bid was 540. So there was an increase of 125 for that collection of 4 line items. It's unfortunate that in the spreadsheet here, it wasn't broken out among the 4 line items, but it encompasses those 4 items. It wasn't that 0 was budgeted, it's that it was rolled into a number. And that's why it's a little misleading. And I had that exact same question. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Answering in detail, unfortunately, will not help us.
No, it won't make it any cheaper, we'll just understand it.
All right. Tom?
Thank you. So my understanding is that bus monitors were paid for by the bus company last year, and it was part of the contract, and now they're going to be school employees? And
Other way around.
the other way around, okay. Oh, all right. Do we have, sorry, follow up. Do we have certain requirements for what those people have to be trained in and things like that? Yes? Okay.
All right, shall we go back to voting on the amended amount for the accommodated account? And it is $12,098,391, correct?
Right.
Brad?
Mr. Chairman, the administration is here. I am curious about how this affects the big picture and the tax levy. When's the appropriate time to discuss that?
Let's take the vote, because if that's okay, and then we can ask the question. The question, Paul, that we want to ask is, with this increase in the school operating and accommodated account, is there an anticipated impact on the levy? Okay, so let's vote on the accommodated amount. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? 8-0. Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate the time. So should we queue that up later, Brad, or do you want to actually ask that now?
Your call.
For the accounting. So we've got a question for you, either Paul or John, about
Scorecard team.
the scorecard team. Have you, the question is, have you worked through the math about the impact of this increase in the school operating?
Was the number the 710,000-ish?
Yeah, what
So
what
that
kind of
brings
impact
the-
does that have on the levy?
On the levy, goes from 4.5 to 5.1, a little over 5.1.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of other things before we actually get to that fixed number, but, because that won't be fixed until November, right? The levy's set in November. All right,
So with that amount, the accommodated went from 6.6 to 10.2, and operating from 3.75 to 4.4.
right,
And that affects the levy by,
great, good. Yeah, we had the direct increases, but not the levy increases.
Thank you,
Phil.
Mr. Chairman. If you added that onto the tax bill, as opposed to taking it from free cash, what would it represent to the individual homeowner?
It is going on to the tax bill.
This is raising
This new
appropriate.
700,000 is going on the
Yeah,
tax
so
appropriate.
we should probably
That was
explain
not
that.
factored until you heard that, right?
Correct.
So what were we thinking was the average tax bill raise, and what is it?
You know, we don't make predictions on that.
Okay.
But the levy was 4.5, we were balanced to, and now it's going up to
510?
just over 5.1.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, shall we move on? The second item on the agenda is the item number 21, the proposal to support an economic development director. Frank, you going to give us the intro on that?
I don't know, how were you set up to introduce it?
We do have a video that we do want to show. I thought I would, do you want to watch the video first, which kind of gives background on it, or do we want to lay it out first? And I've asked Frank if he would,
Yeah, all
Do
right, so
that presentation.
let me just say a few words while he sets up. You're going to see a video of Paul Sagarino, and it's his first HBO session, and it's very good. And all kidding aside, what's that?
He promised Matt Damon, though.
Yeah.
we haven't determined what budget the production costs are coming out of, but that will be a omnibus
This will
article.
be on BCAT later, right?
So the way this article is set up, in one swath, it would create a new position in the administrative and professional plan for the individual, a director-level person, and it would fund it. And the primary discussions, which this video, you should kind of get your antenna up and sort of tee your questions up, I think, to pursue it. The single biggest thing that the subcommittee was concerned about was, this is a fairly new thing. Not that we've never thought about this before, but we've never actually staffed this position. And there's lots of questions around, what are the specifics of what you expect the person to do? What skill sets do they need? What's the return? How do you measure it? And so most of the discussion in the subcommittee was around, the idea certainly sounds good. The specifics you can't really be sure of, but you can get a good sense, and you'll see it from the video, on what the presentation is on justifications for it. So the arguments that we got into weren't so much, does this make any sense? It was, do we know enough about the details to engage in a permanent hire forthwith, within the next, 6 months? And we had very mixed feelings on that. And some of the suggestions were, why not get a consultant? Why not get a contractor? Why don't you get your feet wet and wrap some real detail around where this is going and what kind of people you need? And there were reasons that could be good. There are reasons why that could be problematic. We ended up with a subcommittee split vote. And where I came down was that I came into this thinking it's not such a great idea, because we're jumping into it very quickly, and there's a lot that you're going to learn just by putting somebody to work on this list of objectives, and let's see where you take it. And it's driven off of the master plan, it's driven off of feedback we're getting from people that are working with us today on projects in the community, and it's driven from your own sense of where are we going as a community. My feeling was, and the way the article is set up, it's kind of an all or nothing deal. Either you're going to create the position and fund it, or we're going to do something different. I wanted to play with, could we turn it into contracting dollars? Could we, do something a little different? And that isn't that easy to do with this article, so that would be a little bit of a reset. My feeling was, after a lot of listening here, is I was 80%, this is a direction you want to go in, The mechanics of how we get there is debatable, and I came down with 80%, we should go ahead with it, and 20% very concerned about there might be some rough sledding in the first year or two, sorting out really what am I getting out of it, and how are we managing it, and, you know, what the direction is. David came down on the 50-50 side, and that's why you see a split vote from the subcommittee, one in favor, one opposed. We all had some reservations about it, but I think in general, there was somewhat of a consensus that it's not a crazy idea. There is benefit, and at some point, we've changed enough as a community that, and if you look at the competition around us, and you'll see that here, you're going to want to be doing something like this sooner rather than later. So that's where the subcommittee came down. We should probably do the video, get their presentation, and then have some more debate. It's not a simple matter to decide on this.
All right.
Let me know if you guys can hear when it starts to play.
Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation about Economic Development Director. Many years ago, when I was in school, I had a teacher that frequently scolded me by saying, "Mr. Sagarino, you need to learn how to enunciate your words." Years later, when I decided to look that word up in the dictionary to find out what it meant, I have to tell you that I agree with that teacher. So, in an effort to focus on enunciating my words and to provide you with complete and coherent information, we decided to do this presentation in this format. So let's begin. The current status of Burlington's commercial sector. I think everybody would probably agree that Burlington has a thriving commercial sector and has been one for many years. We are the envy of communities all over the state. As a community, we were always ahead of the curve, and residents back in the 1950s identified the opportunity presented when Route 128 was brought to town. In more recent years, the town utilized the PDD as a development tool, and redevelopments such as 3rd Ave and the district have sustained our growth for the past decade. Burlington was also quick to realize that companies want amenities and work to transform the business district from more than just a place to work and shop, but also a place to play and eat. These two charts clearly demonstrate the success of our commercial sector. As a reminder, commercial values make up approximately 1/3 of our total value, yet pick up 2/3 of our total tax levy. In simpler terms, what this means is that we're able to spend on services like Lexington does and tax like Woburn does. However, life is difficult at the top and success is difficult to maintain. If you don't believe me, you can ask these two guys. What does a vibrant business community bring to us? Simply put, and no other way to say it, but a vibrant business community translates into vibrant services provided to the residents. And here in Burlington, a vibrant business community lessens the burden on residential taxpayers. As you can see from these charts, we have the second lowest average single-family tax bill in the group. Yet the next chart shows that we're the 3rd highest in expenditures per capita. And for us, expenditures mean services. In addition, having all these businesses in the community results in amazing levels of corporate sponsorship and philanthropy and support of local nonprofits and civic events. Urban Chamber sponsors fireworks, Keurig sponsors the 4th of July, Millipore sponsors the COA and school department, Oracle provides us with grants for public safety, and Leahy helps out just about everywhere, most recently with the Outdoor Fitness Center at TRW Field. I couldn't possibly name them all. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that having these amenities within our town provides residents with the ability to enjoy first-class dining, shopping, and entertainment options that they would otherwise need to travel to Boston for. However, we still face financial challenges. A word I probably use too frequently when when someone asks me about Burlington is fortunate, and I remind myself how fortunate we are on a daily basis. But like all communities, we still face financial challenges. We have an aging infrastructure, and we'll need to continue to invest in this going forward. We have long-term liabilities for pension and OPEB, and the cost of our services continually outpace our available revenues. So what is our competition doing? This is actual footage taken at a Middlesex Street meeting of other communities pursuing our businesses. Just kidding, it's actually seen from Game of Thrones. But the fact remains that our competition to attract and retain businesses has grown dramatically. Communities that previously took pride in being strictly residential have figured out the benefits of having business in their town to spread the tax burden. In researching this initiative, we met with economic development professionals in neighboring communities. They took great pride in letting us know that their intention is to make their community more like Burlington, and that to do so, they will be happy to take from us. They also thank us for our work in creating an amenity-rich environment, which they now use as a selling point for their communities as being a half mile down the road or 2 exits away from everything we have to offer. What's different in the business landscape? So what is different? What has changed, you might be thinking? Burlington has always been able to retain and attract good businesses. Perhaps the most important thing that I've learned through this process, and the one thing that I hope everybody understands, is this: businesses want predictability. Predictability is what is lacking most in our process. That is nobody's fault. That is a function of being a town government in Massachusetts and the way that we are required to operate. However, businesses are increasingly unwilling to invest time and resources in a process with an uncertain timeline and an unpredictable ending. During our research, it was suggested to us that we'll never know how many companies kicked the tires here and moved on because their project required either a lengthy process through an elected board or an uncertain ending here at town meeting. Time and unpredictability kill development deals. Another element that's different is that town borders matter less than they used to. We are only about 15 miles or so from the center of Boston. If we were in Philadelphia or most other major cities and you were 15 miles outside of downtown, you know where you'd be? You'd still be in Philadelphia. So outside of this region, everybody looks at us not as Lexington, Waltham, or Burlington, but just as Boston. A company wants to open an office in Boston, and to them, Boston could be Braintree, Danvers, or Burlington. The individual borders that we as natives use to define ourselves are much less important once you leave this area. Projects used to be financed locally. Now many projects are financed by giant, faceless real estate investment trusts that only care about timelines, deadlines, and return on investment. In many cases, they are unwilling to take a risk on an unpredictable ending and will move on to a deal with less uncertainty. In summary, to compete in the future, we need to proactively have the zoning and other conditions in place to attract and retain the types of businesses and industries which we want to have in town. How does the Economic Development Director position help? We envision that the Economic Development Director will become the primary point of contact in the face of the town to the business community. It will work with the existing businesses within the town to understand their needs and to retain them within the town. The position will develop strong working relationships with department heads, elected and appointed officials, and the community at large to gain an understanding of what type of businesses that we want to have in town. The Economic Development Director will function as a quarterback to prospective businesses by providing a roadmap for those businesses to navigate the town's permitting processes through planning, conservation, Board of Health, ZBA, and the Board of Selectmen, and to also work alongside our department heads to identify and troubleshoot issues in advance. We anticipate that this coordination will keep all parties fully informed, prepared, Sometimes that may even include quickly telling a prospective business a quick no. I'm sorry, we won't be able to accommodate that project on that site. The Economic Development Director will immerse themselves in market trends to identify the conditions and zoning that we need to proactively implement before a company looks to locate here. One target market is the industries that are aligned with our biggest businesses, Leahy, Northeastern, and Milford. These three industry leaders will continue to serve as a catalyst to generate additional interest in our community. The Economic Development Director will represent the town at the Chamber, trade shows, Middlesex Street Coalition, and with the development community at large. But this isn't just about big business. It's also about understanding and creating the conditions under which small and locally owned businesses can thrive, succeed, and prosper. To that end, we also wish to have the Economic Development Director focus some efforts on the town center. Amazing work was done years ago by the Town Center 3A Subcommittee to create zoning in line with the residents' vision for what we want the center to be. It's a long-term initiative and significant investment has occurred. But what we found is that other communities put continuous effort to find ways to make their town center districts more vibrant. Some great examples of what other communities have done to give residents a reason to linger in their town centers by promoting pop-up events, arts and culture, and tot lots. An example that comes to mind is working with a landlord to allow us to utilize a vacant storefront for a temporary community art gallery where local artists can display their work. The proposed position. This is not a new idea. It's been kicked around for years. The town has undertaken studies and created plans. Now we need the boots on the ground to put the plans into action. The best way to do that is to have a dedicated and knowledgeable employee who can focus their efforts on bringing these ideas to life and these plans to fruition. This body appropriated over $200,000 several years ago for the master plan. I'd like to point out that thousands of hours of time and effort was put into that by staff, residents, elected officials, and others to map out the plans for the town's future. 2 of the 8 sections of this report deal with economic development in the town center. I'd submit to you that this is significant evidence that these are areas that we need to focus on in the upcoming years. We have planned the work, and now it is time for us to work the plan. This position will report to the town administrator. That will allow for all of our existing boards and committees to maintain their independence and have the opportunity to review and comment with any ideas that are brought forward. And as is the case now, all zoning changes still come to town meeting for a final decision. This position is requested at a Group 15 in the A&P plan. This group contains other similar type positions, such as planning director, building commissioner, public health director, and library director. This range of pay would give us the ability to attract an up-and-coming person in the field or to recruit a seasoned person from another community. To summarize, thank you very much for listening. I know that was a lot of information to process, so I'd like to summarize a couple of key points. First, we think the town center has great potential for the future. It will take some time, but I think we should continue to put in the effort. Second, the Economic Development Director will become the face of the town to the business community and will work alongside our existing staff to help coordinate the process and gain efficiencies. Third, and this is very important, businesses need predictability. If there's a long board approval process on town meeting vote, they are moving on to the next community. We heard it repeatedly when we were researching this, and it was brought up at the Biotech Forum last January. We will never know how many companies passed on us because we weren't ready to accommodate them. Lastly, and also very important, this initiative is intended to maintain what we have. A resident asked me, why would we want to allocate these funds toward business and not residents? The truth is that this position ultimately benefits residents as much, if not more so, than businesses. Remember that commercial sector makes up 1/3 of the value within the town, yet pays 2/3 of the taxes. Our goal is to maintain commercial at 1/3 so that we can continue to provide an excellent level of services and mitigate property tax increases for the residents. That concludes our presentation. I couldn't possibly thank all of the people who contributed to this individually, but I'd like to at least attempt to get as many as possible. Board of Selectmen, fellow department heads, elected officials, residents, and members of the business community. I'd also like to give a special thanks to John and Whitney as they participated in this with me every step of the way. Thank you very much.
Well, where should we go from here? Subcommittee, do you have any more comments?
Well, there were a bunch of questions that we brought forward. Some of them, a couple I'd like to just mention. One was, who did you meet with in other communities to get feedback on their experience with,
The chair's letting you down, Frank.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I know I'm heavy, but this is making it a lot worse. So Bedford, Lexington, Lowell were three that Paul had mentioned, and they had, I think, pretty good interactions. And the findings were, we're in a leadership position, but there are things going on out there in the other communities to reposition themselves where we're not necessarily at today. So there was a lot of feedback around the benefits of this position in, I mean, as nearby as Bedford, which, by the way, you know, when we built Northwest Park, we lost iRobot to Bedford as an example. That was, I think I wanted to know. Another thing was, what makes you think anything would become more predictable? You know, the planning board isn't going to change, the bylaws aren't going to change, town meeting's going to be, who knows how they necessarily would vote on anything. You got to go through all the same footwork. But the point is, somebody who owns the point position and is really in touch with, you know, what's likely to happen with your proposal, or what are the things that you're going to be faced with, and you can lay out for them, this is how you need to be prepared, this is what you're going to face, this is an area where we can help you come in with a presentation or an offer that fits better, does make it more likely, unless it's an insider, somebody that's already developing properties in the town already, and they already know all these ground rules, it makes it more likely that they will have an expectation and a predictable set of circumstances that they need to navigate and invest money in. And, you know, I think that's important to understand. And then I questioned significantly, why do we think we're going to be able to make, you know, the town center move any faster or any differently than it's been moving right along? Because we've got this minor boat anchor called Route 3A that runs right down the thing, and everything's on the sidewalks. And, you know, I think the answer there is, all of these things are going to take time, but if somebody is given a goal to identify the things that can be done there and try to, you know, and make them happen through encouragement and through more information about what's needed where, you might be able to make better progress. I don't think we're going to be able to talk the state into redoing 3A just because we have an economic development director. That's naive. But, you know, the town center is important, and I think it's a valid point. I question that a little bit about how far you'd get. The last thing I just want to say, and I'm going to leave it up to all of you, is that I really think the climate that we operated in, starting in, say, 1960 up till about 1990, that businesses could come in and be successful is changing dramatically right before our eyes. The nature of the small businesses that want to come in are very different than what anybody envisioned. They're coming out of think tanks and high-tech tanks from Amazon, from biotech centers in Cambridge. So there's a lot of small business stuff that's going on. It's not just go into an executive office or a suite where you can plug in a bunch of computers. Their needs are changing, and they're real, and they're going to go to places. So I think that's important. And I also think that it's obvious how the support for retail, the kind of infrastructure to support retail is really changing, and it's not just everything goes online. It's got everything to do with data analytics companies, analysis of what consumers are buying and selling, places where you can pick goods up, who knows, drop-offs for, zones for drone robotic drop-offs. I mean, things are really moving. So I think we need to not rest on our laurels, but actually take a real hard look at where is this going so that I can start to grab the little pieces now that in 10 or 15 years, we've completely transformed the kind of commerce base that we live off today. I think that's a real concern that I actually have. And I think having someone that owns at least a piece of this as their job 24/7 would be a good thing. It's not a slam dunk. This is not going to be, it's going to take a while to sort this out, but I don't think we'll sort it out the right way if we just keep doing things the way we are. So that's all I have to offer for free.
David, do you want to add your perspective for this?
Absolutely, and again, Frank did a very good job, and I will say, although I'm a dissenting vote on the subcommittee, that the position itself, I think Paul did a good job in describing what the overall picture is for this person, being the point person, being that quarterback. And I think for a community that relies so much on its commercial base, we want to keep that commercial base. Having that quarterback is a good thing. So this has been something that's been talked about for a long time. My feeling was I was reluctant on hiring someone right out of the gate with a lot of the questions that I still had unanswered. How do you judge the person? What matrix are you using? Are they bringing that value added? So even though in the big picture I understood the importance of the position, I wanted to define these a little bit more and get a better understanding of what we're hiring. My thought, and we had the open discussion about it, was to commit to someone, but not as an employee, because once you hire the employee, it's going to be very difficult if they're not working out, even though they're non-union and through the AMP. It'll be difficult to get rid of them. I would suggest that we do a 2-year, contract employee, a commitment, not a consultant that just comes in and lays the groundwork for us. But is there someone that's at retirement age or close to retirement age that wants a full-time position for 2 years, lay the groundwork, figure out a lot of these pieces to what this position is going to be, and then either that person grooms into a permanent position down the road, we decide that it's really not as valuable or worth the money spending, or at that point, but give the person a good period of time. Give them a 2-year period of time. Whether that person is out there or not, I don't know. But is it worth at least exploring that option, bringing it back in September, January, or whatever? We've been talking about this since '93. I don't think there's a need to have this done right now, and I do have still some open questions. So why commit to hiring the employee? Why not maybe go a different route with the same end goal in mind, but maybe better suited for us? So that's why I still voted no.
Phil, ask a
I'll
few
be
questions
brief.
and then we'll take
No, I'm not
turns.
going to ask any
You
questions.
can come back.
No, I'm just going to, I'm opposed to this. It's another layer of bureaucracy, and I go back and look at what's different over the last 60 years. What is different? In 1964, we were voted the fastest growing town in the country, and we've continued to do that. The properties that were built in those days are all been redevelopment at once and twice. Over the last 15 years, on average, we've done $200 million in construction costs without an economic development director. Are we concerned about our competition? What are they going to replicate? Our reason is location, location, location. Nobody else is going to replicate that. There's 1 or 2 other communities that maybe can compete on that basis. If you look at the Department of Local Services, our total assessed value in 2015 was $5.2 billion. Our current assessed valuation is $6.6 billion, according to the state, in 5 years from 5.2 to 6.6. Now, a good portion of that is commercial development. They represent 1/3 of the community, but a greater portion of that growth was in the residential community, and we can all see it in our neighborhoods. within the next 5 years, maybe 10, all of the pre-1970 construction on the residential side of the community is going to disappear, and is going to be replaced with properties that are 2 to 2.5 times the value of what the purchase price was. I mean, a lot in Burlington that you can put now a 900 to, well, those three on Francis Wyman Road, for instance, which back up to the gun club and what have you, very little land. Those things are going for $850,000. So all of our pre-75 construction is going to more than double in value over the next 10 years. It is not our job. We're not going to replace Bob Buckley or Vaughn to do this economic development. When you consider who we have in the community, Kelly, Murray, Duffy, Cummings, Gutierrez, Nordblom, National Development, Simon's Property, are all spending millions of dollars to generate development and bring in tenants into the place. So, I mean, I just don't see how that's going to be replicated by another layer of bureaucracy where we have one point man who's going to tell, or point woman, who's going to tell a developer or a prospective tenant whether or not this is a viable a situation. And lastly, I would make the point of the town center. The town center was a disaster. Spent all that time, and it was a disaster in the end result, in that what happened was the easiest things to build were built. The condos in back, the condos across the street, et cetera. What we wanted to change was the, what do we used to call it? What's that place in Utah or in Arizona? In any event.
Boulevard?
The little properties there, okay, that are 50 years old, that are unencumbered, that are fully rented. So what developer in his right mind is going to knock all of that stuff down, take on debt, and put something else in there, unless you give him an incentive? So if we wanted to change the town center, we wanted to get more revenue, make a zoning change, the same way we have done it for the last 40, 50, 60 years. How did we get extra value out of the Trammell Spray Engineering property? We did a planned development district, and we probably multiplied that value by 10 or 20 times. Same thing happened with the GE site. How did we multiply that value by 10 times? We did a planned development district. Same thing with the Nordblom company. Look at the value that's been created there with zoning changes. We didn't have any residential up there. We didn't have a hotel up there. Oh, we did have that one miserable hotel. And now we've got all those units, residential units. We've got a gigantic new gymnasium. I don't know how that, well, that's an editorial comment. In any event, nothing has changed in the last 60 years, okay? The question is, how fast do we want to grow? We're growing fast enough and have continued to grow fast enough that we can support our obligations financially. And, you know, I hate to say this in the Ways and Means Committee, but we are awash in capital. We're overflowing with money, okay? OPEB, what's the other one there? The insurance one, the Mr. Doherty's account, the long-term account, what's that other one?
The overlay?
The overlay, but what is it? Stabilization, free cash, what's our free cash, 10, 11 million? So the idea that we need to grow any faster, or that somebody else is somehow going to replicate our location and our performance over the past 60 years, is just not going to be done by a simple addition to the bureaucracy. It's just not going to happen. This is wasted money. So I won't be voting for this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Phil. Doug, do you have some comments?
I do. So I am generally in favor of this. I have some of the similar thoughts as David. I'd almost rather see some kind of consulting or a short-term contract person who's maybe more highly experienced than we could afford to pay as our first full-time person to maybe lay out the goals and clear up some of the part of this that feels disorganized or just not well-defined. So I'd love to see that, where then we would have a better definition of what we expect or what we could do to help attain the goals that you're defining. I have a hard time seeing how this person's going to solve some of the problems we face, because they are other elected boards and other, you know, it makes it very challenging. You listed Millipore, Leahy, and Northeastern as our most important customers, so to speak, and in the last 18 months, I've watched them get beaten about this town in ways that were sometimes embarrassing over projects that already been approved by town meeting or that the town seemed to be in favor of. So that's our reputation, and that's what people talk about Burlington and maybe want to avoid coming here. I'm not sure it's so much because we can't sell ourselves enough. I think that we have some other reputations that we need to work on over time. But if this person also kind of brings some consistency to calling that out and brings some consistency to pointing out where some of our inadequacies are, that may help. Otherwise, I think using the same numbers that you use, Phil, I think it's a relatively small dollar figure for the amount of money that you're looking at. And to me, it feels a little bit like an insurance policy. I don't expect my house to catch on fire, but I pay that little bit every year in case it does. I don't expect us to start to lose out with an exodus of companies to Bedford or Lexington, but a slow trickle would be painful, and it wouldn't take much of a trickle. It wouldn't take much of us losing attention or not hearing a rumor or not addressing something fast enough that we could lose that amount of money pretty quickly. What it feels like we're going to spend with this. So,
Brad?
Thank you. So to the administration, what would you be open to readdressing this in the fall with the contract position? What are your thoughts on contract versus full-time?
Well, what I can say about a contract position, and this is just my feeling on it, I think a person towards the last 2 years of their career is probably the last person that I'd be thinking about wanting for this position. I mean, not talking about someone that age, but I think what we want is different ideas for the future. And just, I've worked for 4 different communities, and I think it's important for the person to be working here on a daily basis, to be embedded with us, to be going to meetings with us, in order to really understand what the community is. I think it's important that that person's here 365 days a year alongside of us. Communities each have their own little culture and their own little nuances and their own different wants and needs. And I could speak to that just from my own experience of working in different communities. It takes you a while to sort of understand the community that you're in, especially if you don't live there. So I think that for those 2 reasons, and just I don't think that we would get a significant bang for our buck in terms of what a consultant can do, I think would be far more expensive than what we could get done with an employee. But that's just my gut feeling on it. Again, just my thoughts on it.
Follow-up? Other questions? John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had a lot of concerns about this position too, and so I actually went to Town Hall 1 subcommittee meeting where we did talk about this pretty in depth. Definitely my concerns were that it can be very difficult to measure the success of a person like this, and some of the materials provided as backup were a little squishy in my mind. And this position is fundamentally a sales and marketing position for the town, and they're the squishiest people around. Apologies to them if you happen to be one. But in the end, it boils down to what's your return on investment in this. I think Paul did a good job of describing some of the conversations he had, both with other towns and with the business community on this, and that was reassuring. I think, and I think there was some good discussion about, why isn't this just the planning board or planning department's job to do this? And I think Frank in particular made some good points on how it really is a different kind of role where this is someone that can really, proactively advocate for someone and really help them drive through the process, which is not necessarily what you want your planning department doing. They're bringing a lot of vision. Hopefully, the right person is bringing a lot of vision to this position where they're coming up with initiatives of, if we want to be like Kendall Square, this is the kind of environment we should provide and changes that we might make. If we want to be, the next Silicon Valley, whatever, they can look at a bigger picture than perhaps the people in the trenches are dealing with day to day and dealing with all the applications and so on. So, in terms of, as Doug was saying, the return on the investment, either in terms of bringing in new business or preventing the loss of current business, there doesn't have to be a lot done before we break even on the position. You factor in a salary, OPEB and benefits and, the budget that goes along with this kind of job. Maybe you're putting $200K a year into it. If they're not able to make a $200K difference, they're obviously doing a pretty lousy job. So I guess where I came out on this, I would be in favor of this with the caveat that in a year or two's time, if we can't articulate something reasonably concrete that this person did or accomplished, if I'm still on Ways and Means, I'll be fairly ruthless in not voting for a budget that includes this person and canning them. In any real-world job, if the marketing director isn't bringing in sales ultimately, you get rid of them. And so I think we have to go into this with the mindset that this is not a job for life. It's not you're a nice person and you're saying good things. It's got to be, I want to, let's see the money associated with this person that they actually brought in, and don't be shy about saying, you're a great person, but you're not doing a great job. It's time for you to go. We may replace you with someone else if we think it's still a good concept, or we may say, gee, that was a bad idea. Why don't we listen to Phil all the time? And those are possible outcomes. But in the end, I decided it's worth a shot with the caveat that, we truly do evaluate the success or failure of this person.
Other comment? Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I've had conversations with members of the business community in town, and most of them are supporting this. One of the things that has been said to me is that, you can't rest on your laurels. Burlington is Burlington, but, it doesn't necessarily mean that that'll mean the same thing 15, 20 years from now. And, what we don't want is we don't want to drive along 128 and see abandoned buildings all along because nobody wants to be here anymore. So I think the thought about this position makes a little bit of sense if we want to continue the way of life that we have, being attractive to businesses, good businesses coming in here. And so, David, I liked your idea a little bit, and I don't know enough about that kind of business, whether a contract makes sense or not. But it makes me a little bit uneasy to see, well, why do we really need this? Based upon what Phil said, is that we've done a pretty good job, but doesn't mean that we'll continue to do a great job. Phil, you may not be on Ways and Means for a long time, so, and not to say, but I remember when I first came on Ways and Means, and I've been here for almost 20 years, that the criticism I heard is that we were just kind of a rubber stamp for every department that came on board. And I don't think that feeling is prevalent anymore. I think that we've done, if you take a look at one of the charts that you saw was the rate of the tax levy compared to other towns. We were way below what's going on in Massachusetts. And we'd like to keep it that way, still providing the amount of services that we have. And I do think that it is important that we know to stay on top of things. I mean, I know that being here on Ways and Means, I've learned a lot of things about businesses and about telecommunication poles and things like that that was never a part of my conversation in everyday life. So I think to have somebody that's, you're gonna need somebody with an outgoing personality, with obviously the gift of gab, with a pleasant personality that people like. You know, it's not like a movie star, but you need somebody that's outgoing and refreshing. And it's hard to judge, but, you know, you don't know what you're getting. And I would like to see this thing tweaked a little bit. I still have apprehensions about hiring a full-time employee, but I do think that the thought process kind of makes sense. So I think if based upon what we're looking for financially, I might be willing to bite the bullet to, let's see if this thing succeeds. And I agree with you, John, let's have some sort of measure of, has it been successful, Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Other questions, comments? If not, is it time for a motion?
So, point of order, Mr. Chairman. I'm not actually sure, I may be behind, I got enough paper this year to sink a ship. What in terms of dollars, there's the position, an A&P 15, what's the dollar motion that you are looking for?
It's in the warrant for $85,000. We assumed a potential salary of $75,000 first year and then $10,000 potential.
All right, so actually, it's not in the warrant.
It's not in the warrant.
That was part of my problem.
It was on some spreadsheet that I got.
All right, so let me make a motion, Mr. Chairman. I move that we approve, as requested, an A&P grade 15 position, and that we fund it through whatever mechanism, raise and appropriate or otherwise, that wording, at the level of $85,000. A detail behind that is, the intention here is sort of $10K spending, $75K salary. Obviously, benefits don't get counted in there, they come out separately. So that's the motion.
Question?
Second question, Tom.
Yeah, Frank, you really think 75,000 is gonna attract somebody?
Well, that's their request. I don't know.
Half-year.
Do you think that,
Or is it half?
Half-year.
oh, okay.
But
Oh, really? Okay.
they've got the salaries for the position in other towns, and that's in the
Okay,
ballpark,
all
yeah.
right, yep.
Yeah, actually, for a
Sorry,
full
Lee.
year, excuse me,
No,
Mr.
go ahead.
So if you were to prorate that to a full year, it's actually quite high compared to the communities.
That's not a half year.
Yeah, so you should clarify that for us.
I got it right here.
Okay, the dollars.
The range on that group 15 is from approximately 80,700 to 106,000 approximately. So we feel like within that range. we can
So
attract
the
somebody-
85K, you're assuming by the time you got the person on board, there'd probably only be 2/3 of a year or something.
Yes.
That's the thinking. But it's basically, I think someone threw out a number. If you look at the position, I know I'm off the motion. That's the motion. We need a second. We're not going any.
There was a
All
second.
right. So if I may just finish, Mr. Chairman, it's pretty clear. You got to look at like 100K in salary. You got to look at, another 25% in benefits, which are hidden. And you've got to look at a budget to support the position through forums they go to, travel, whatever. And, that could easily be, $10,000 a year. So that's what you're looking at. And, the question's still on the table. Why do we have to commit to a permanent hire? And that's for you to navigate, Paul. But I also asked the moderator if we could amend this motion to be a 2-year contract. And he was fairly clear that he thought that amendment would be out of order based on the way the article was written. But we could find ways around that if that's where this ended up before you duke it out on the floor. I can think of some creative ways to get around that, so.
All right, we'll move to section. Are there any more comments, questions, opinions? All right. So I'm assuming, just to follow up on my own, you talk about our budget for the job. I assume that's coming out of the town administrator's existing operating budget. It's not.
That is
extra.
my understanding. This is not new money outside the guidelines.
Right. The only thing that's not in the guideline is the 85K that's proposed in the warrant article.
That's not in the guideline, correct?
Right, which means I assume you're proposing free cash for that, for the first year?
It's proposed within RNA.
RNA?
Yep.
Okay. So it's one more thing that exceeds the guideline, right?
Theoretically, yes.
Only if they're hired.
Anytime in the first year.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I got a motion to raise and appropriate 70.
Chairman,
Sorry, Brett.
do you have that already built into the running tally?
It's built into the balancing of the overall budget.
Okay, so it's,
Okay, so it doesn't raise anything,
We
okay.
just sort of followed, this is how the town has added positions to the A and P in the past with a separate warrant article. So we followed the past tradition as to how the town's actually created the new positions.
Got it, okay. All right, so I got a motion to raise and appropriate 85K to fund a economic development director at Group 15. I'm looking at the-
And to create the position
And
in the
create-
AP
and
plan.
create the
It's a two-foot,
All right, so most of that is actually, almost all of that is written into the current warrant, except the amount.
right.
All right. And I've got a motion and a second. So, all in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? 7-3-0. All right, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Can you make that video a little bit shorter, and are you going to show it to town meeting?
Planning on showing it to town meeting.
Can you make it shorter?
Run it faster.
Right now, make it real short.
Anyway, sorry. And this is a bad room to do that kind of a video in. It's got a wicked audio effect.
In here?
Yeah, that video, anyway, it sounded like you were in a large an echo chamber.
A very small budget available for this.
So I could probably put in a pitch for BCAT. They have a studio, camera people, and I think you could find a production coordinator who'd be happy to help. But it was a very good, it was very well put together video. Thank you for that, all in one place. Okay, moving on to a number of, fund the administration and professional classification plan, also Town Hall 1. David, Frank?
So this,
David?
you all received the backup with our groups. Classification plan, A and P plan is basically our non-union department heads and managers and what have you. The plan, as you see it, is the exact same as last year, except, again, on page 1 in all the groups, except for the stipends, which are increased by 2.5%. The individual steps on the back, they're presenting is a 1 year with the A&P for a 2.5% increase. So you'll see the chart in the back, basically, that is 2.5% each line item added from last year. Other than that, everything is added. We just approved the economic director, but that's, again, through a separate line item that will be added next year on this plan. So subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor of support.
All right. Questions, anyone? Comments?
Did you give the amount, David?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Doesn't have an
The
amount.
amount is $92,463,
Right,
and that will be coming from negotiated settlements.
because it's got a delta, right?
Yeah.
92,463.
Yeah. Is that a motion?
That is a motion to
I'll
approve.
second.
All right. Okay. Any other comments? All in favor? Opposed, abstaining, 800.
Where did that go?
Great, thank you. And Article 23, funding the part-time compensation plan.
Our part-time compensation plan, again, employees that are classified that work less than 20 hours a week, seasonal, temporary, or seasonal temporary people as well. So you see a lot of people that are covered, as John said, in the BMEA, DPW, some are rec department help. So the permanent part-timers, also, they are recommending a 2.5% adjustment for 1 year. The part-time seasonal individuals is a 2% increase for the year. Basically, those are summer help and what have you, and ultimately you're looking at comparing those to, minimum wage jobs and enough that you can keep people of qualified intent to be employed. So, subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor of supporting this.
It's $4,120.
Thank you, Frank.
All right, questions on that one?
Motion to approve,
Second.
$4,120.
Second.
To fund the part-time compensation plan.
Great, all in favor? Opposed, abstaining, 800. Article, let's see, the original one. So I guess in order, Article 24 is the police patrol contract. Are you up for that, Brad?
Could we take, since
You want to take,
folks from the fire department have waited so patiently, could we?
Sure.
All right.
Okay,
Do you wanna
Article
do-
26.
Do you want to do the BMEA, where they're right here, and it's their last one?
It's the last town hall one
And then they're done.
for them.
One more for the BMEA.
Okay, sorry.
This will only take a second.
You're getting closer, though.
I should get my ordering up front. Yes,
Right.
okay. BMEA, Article 28, David.
So again, you see the sheet that kind of defines everyone in this category, and it's a wide range of people. This is a 3-year contract that has been negotiated. The first year includes a 2.5% wage adjustment or COLA adjustment. Second year, a 2.5% increase. In the third year, a 1.75% increase, with the addition of a higher end step, adding a step 13 to the listing. This is being looked at with other contracts as well, and I may let Paul get into a little bit of the negotiating of that, but we're going to see that in other contracts as well. Again, to get to, right now, about 40% of the BMEA group is at the upper step level, and the goal was, again, ultimately, to look at shorter COLA adjustments down the road, but giving the compensation of that additional step for that long-term employee. So kind of balancing those two out. The motion this year would amount to $155,472. Subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor, but I might ask that they follow up a little bit with that third year.
And a selectman's vote is pending on this one.
Selectors vote is pending.
Okay. Would you care to expand upon that contract?
So to follow up, it was a fairly simple contract, and what our goal was in those out years is to try to have the increases be all in, something like 2.5, like the first 2 years. But if we were going to try to, if anything was going to cost additional money, that would have to come off of that. And we're trying to reset the wage adjustments to be, it's not just your standard 2.5 and then whatever else you can fit in there. That's sort of the all-in number. So we're trying to reset what the wage adjustment is, and as people are moving through the steps, they get an increase based on the difference between steps. So as an effort to be creative on how we can get that number at the top higher, which helps everybody, and eventually you're going to get there if you stay here long enough. But that has to come, the money for that has to come from somewhere. So by adding the step and making it phased in at halfway through the year with only half of the step, you really only pay for a quarter of that, and we only have less than half of the people on that top step. So dollar-wise, the cost in that year is much lower. It bakes in an addition in the successor agreement when you finally have one, but it costs lower to accomplish what the long-term goal is to have that total, that final step be a little higher. Has to come off the backs of the wage adjustment throughout the scale too. So that's kind of what our goal is.
Okay. Questions, Steve?
Just a quick logistical question. So is this the FY '20 is the first year of this contract, or is it the
Yep.
final? It's
So
the
it'll be
first
20,
year.
21, 22.
Okay, great.
That step
Thanks.
would be 22.
Okay, thank you.
Just to point out for the committee, I don't think we've ever had this many contracts ready to go before they expired. I will say that's a credit for us being able to hire good people with John, but it's also a credit to the employee groups that we met with. We really met a lot, and we worked hard to try to get things done in advance as opposed to falling behind like sort of has been the tradition. So we can't guarantee going forward we'll have these many deals done prior to town meeting, and to be honest with you, it almost killed us to do it. But I do think that there is some value to having some of these things squared away in advance. And again, thank you to our team and also to the employees that we negotiated with, because it's pretty difficult to have a 2-hour session of banging your heads against each other and say, hey, why don't we do that again in 2 days as opposed to a month from now? So it really takes a lot of commitment to put the effort in to get them done. So we're pretty pleased with the amount of work that went into these.
Okay. Other questions? If not, I think I already have a motion in a second, right?
Second.
So this is for $155,472 to cover from the negotiated settlement to cover this agreement.
Right.
All in favor? Opposed, abstaining, 10-0-0. And Town Hall 1, that's
That's
her?
it, especially for the,
Oh, except for-
for the special, so we'll do that.
Okay.
That's a big
All right.
discussion.
All right, on to the fire contract. Brad?
Yes, thank you. So this contract has been a long time coming. Both sides have been discussing how to reorganize, and all the reorganization required for the ALS is all negotiable. So these discussions have been going on for some time. Surprisingly, usually when contracts, an agreement is reached, I've always heard, working on Ways and Means all these years, that if both sides are mad or unhappy, then the contract's good, because everybody's on the, well, I'm happy to report that I think both sides are very pleased with the outcome on this, so that was a surprise for me. Mike sent out a summary that John was kind enough to write up on the contracts. What was reached is will cover FY18, FY19, which have passed, and then it'll be the 1 year into FY20. The contract includes a 2.5% increase for each of those 3 years, and does the necessary reorganization on staffing levels for ALS. It also includes, get this right, 12% bump on the paramedic positions, which is competitive in the area. Not at the high end, not at the low end. But it's a competitive number everybody was comfortable with. And again, beyond that, there are a number of much smaller sort of, they're saying language clarification on grievance notification, staffing levels on shift, sick leave, et cetera, which I'm sure they'll be glad to answer questions on. The total amount of this contract We've already encumbered the previous years from past negotiated settlements in the amount of $330,652. For this upcoming year, this will be out of the FY20 negotiated settlement line in the amount of $296,095. And John, if you could check my math here. I thought this was a good number for us to understand. The original fire department, well, the fire department budget as presented at town meeting came in at 1.91%. I have, and I'll see if I got my math right, if we redo all the numbers with the salaries increased both for last year and this year, I get around 3.45%. Their budget increase. I had to model last year's number.
So a little closer to 5.
Which we'll compare models. But anyway, it's in the ballpark of, it's still in the ballpark. But again, this gets us over the hump on moving to ALS, and it builds the increase pay for the paramedics into the budget. And again, the fire department is pleased with the arrangement. The town is pleased with the, Board of Selectmen of the town is pleased with the amount we'll be spending, and Mike and I voted 2-0 to support.
Thank you. Questions, anyone? John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think all the ALS change makes sense and so on, but I'm just curious from a financial point of view, have we tallied up all the actual expenses of going to ALS in terms of, additional training, increased salaries and so on, to understand, what is our P&L on this, so to speak? Have we, when we look at the potential increased revenues from, capturing the full ALS amount against these, total increased costs of, the negotiating your salaries and so on, where do we come out on that?
So to answer your question about the increased salaries and stipends, things, those are calculated within those numbers. In the training, the initial training piece, there's been money that was appropriated either, I think, last May, or maybe before that, in the initial training. The guys behind it probably they're nodding or shaking their head now. So what we have done is ballpark what the current split that we have to give to the third party provider that does it now. Say if we were to get a similar amount of money, it would cover a portion of the added cost, not all of it. And you'll see another article that this board's already voted on to establish the receipts reserve for ambulance, which is where we talked about capturing that added revenue to then be able to offset the fire department budget each year with a portion of those revenues. So quick calculations are that it offsets it to some degree, not the whole thing, but more than half, not the whole thing.
Okay, so just to be clear, adding ALS is definitely costing the town money net to have that increased level of service versus BLS?
Yes.
Even with the increased revenue? Okay, I mean, which could still be the right trade-off to make. I just want to be clear that this is not it's not a self-funding service, so to speak. It's definitely an increased cost service relative to where we had been.
Based on their current revenue, which could change based on.
Well, that's all we have to go on, yeah.
Correct.
Go ahead.
But again, one of the arguments that was made several years ago is that the independent ambulance services, and so many people are bringing ALS in-house, the independent ambulance services are going away. And it actually was just explained to us at the meeting yesterday that there's actually more lucrative businesses that the ambulance services would almost prefer to be in rather than pure emergencies. So I think our hand is being forced. And one thing our town administrator has pointed out, and we're already beginning to see this, having a parametric, I want to say parametrics, that's my business, so paramedics. We may in fact be saving lives by shaving the amount of time it takes to bring treatment. So how do you put a cost on that, John?
Oh, sure, like, as I say, it probably makes sense to go ALS for many other reasons. Just want to make sure people are not thinking that this is a break-even operation. It's a decision that we wanted to raise our level of services, and we're paying extra for it.
At one point I should have made when I talked about the revenues, that's based on the current revenues, but we're fairly certain that those will go up because of things like missed calls now, that it never becomes an ALS call because that third-party ambulance service can't get there. Well, we'll already be there, and if it's going to be an ALS call, we're not going to miss out on that revenue. So we're fairly certain it's going to go up. To what degree, we don't know. So we may be sitting here in a couple of years saying, oh, it's much closer or even paying for itself. It's just based on what we know now, we can't say that.
Thank you.
All right, Frank?
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to, for people listening, more than for just us right here, but, you know, we as a community are doing a lot of good things with incremental services, better services, new services. We've done it in IT, we've done it in schools, we've done it in the Board of Health, and now we're doing something, you know, very valuable with, you know, advanced life support, life-saving measures. But what the community needs to realize is there's a reason why we want to do these things, but they're not free. None of this is free. And so what we're trying to manage is growth in expenses and costs and operating budgets that can match a reasonable amount of valuation and hence tax increases that are needed to do this. That we're trying to keep it in balance, not get ahead of ourselves with just spending crazy money that's going to cause dramatic shifts in the tax rate, or buying things that people don't really want, or whether they know they want them or not, they really need them. This is another example of that. We've done a lot of things like that over the past, I'd say, 5 years, and so, you know, that's why our operating budgets do need to increase. It's part of it. It's a big part of it. Just want to make that point. I think Ways and Means tries very hard to be sensitive to it isn't free, but people want these things, and in some cases, we'd be hurting ourselves by not doing it. You'd be going backwards. So.
All right, Phil?
I think it's important from, not just from the residential standpoint, but the trauma that the department is exposed to on a regular basis is much different than it is for the average bearer of a community. You know, the calls that they get on 128, Route 3, I mean, these are clearly life-saving events that if we can arrive at the right time as quickly as possible with the highest level of training, I mean, you know, lives are at stake there. So I'm in favor of this.
All right.
Motion to approve?
All right, motion to approve, seconded. All in favor?
What is the dollar amount?
The dollar amount is, oh, come on, it's in here. 296,095, right?
For the upcoming year, from the 20, FY20 negotiated settlement amount, and from the previous negotiated settlement lines, which have been encumbered over the past 2 years, that comes to 330,650.
I guess, okay. Thanks for the amounts. We're going to have to work on the wording of the motion when it gets written, because I'm sure that's not in the warrant.
It's not in the book.
It's not in the book.
It'll be in the motion, yes.
It'll be in the motions. Okay. All in favor? 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. Opposed? Abstaining? 901.
And Mr. Chairman, I believe Chief Getman, is this your last visit with us?
My last visit.
So I just want to say thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you all these years, and I'm sure we'll hear more from you at town meeting about the new station house and all that good stuff. But on behalf of Ways and Means, thank you very much. You got to enjoy it for 2 hours.
Thank you, Chief. All right, thank you.
And we've
Brad?
got police as well. So this is very simple. It's a one-year contract for the Police Patrolmen's Association. It's for 1 year, a 2.5% increase for all steps, an adjustment to the rate paid for details and various other sick leave, how they distribute payroll, et cetera, was all negotiated. So they're doing just the 1 year. It'll be a transfer from, it'll be moved from negotiated settlements for FY20 in the amount of $95,901. Check my math again. I believe this moves the police budget from an increase of 0.12% to 1.2%. Got that one right. All right. So Mike and I voted 2-0 to support.
Great. Questions, comments?
So just as a point, are we trying to align the police and the fire contracts on the same cycle? We're not. So we just did a 1 year for fire. It's going to get us 1 more year, and this gets us 1 year?
1 year. So fire has been out. So the fire contract is for last year, this current year, and next year.
And one future one. And this gets us,
They expire this June 30th. This union particularly was adamant about, it's been a very long time that they've had a successor agreement in place at the expiration date of a current agreement, and wanted to do a shorter term. Normally, we wouldn't entertain a 1 year deal unless there's a good reason, and that was a good reason.
so this is FY20 only.
Yes.
But it will accidentally align at least these two.
Yeah, I noticed that. I was wondering why. Yeah.
Is our general goal to keep them unaligned, or
I don't think we care.
do we have a goal?
I think we'd like them lined up if possible.
But would like 3 year contracts if possible, right? That's the real problem.
How often do you want to do this?
Not every year.
All right, any other comments?
Make
Think
a
I've-
motion to approve.
Motion?
Second.
Second? All in favor? 6 and 4 opposed, abstaining, 10-0-0.
And the police command has been withdrawn.
All right,
Yeah. So, can I ask a question on that one?
sure.
So on the police command, are we going to see that out of cycle? Are we going to see that in September or something? Or you don't know, or what?
Hopefully. We've had productive conversations with that
Right.
group. We just weren't able to get it in time for it to come to.
And in all cases, you still think negotiated settlements, which is in the budget, is in the ballpark?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Making pretty good progress. DPW?
Sure. Similar to what we've seen earlier. Gotta get used to that. So yeah, a 3 year deal, 2.5% increase in year 1, 2.5% increase in year 2, a 1.75% increase in the final year with the incremental addition of the step at the mid-year point. Very similar to what John described with the last contract. With the total,
77, 891?
77,890.
Okay. Comments, anyone? Phil?
Yes, just in all of these contracts, are there any working concessions other than, this is strictly pay increases? There are no other concessions on hours worked or extra sick time, any of that type of stuff?
There's a lot of little things in between each of them.
Yeah, there's some language clarifications and some trades in some languages, but not that add additional costs.
No major impact? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Am I? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along with this whole cost of running the ship here, so I think, from my point of view, I think, both nationally and regionally, what we're seeing is 2.5% COLAs are pretty standard these days. Maybe even there's some upward pressure on that nationally. Also, the state is starting to get more aggressive with the whole minimum wage laws. So I think what we're going to be looking at here is a pretty steady diet in order to avoid salary compression and to stay competitive. is a steady stream of these 2.5 to 3s is what it looks like we're getting faced with here. Is that what you're seeing or hearing? No comment. Scary.
That's not what he wants to hear.
Yeah, so the third year, the third year step, the hope is that will provide some headroom for people to go another step, earn some more money through really longevity, and then we can get some of the pressure off of the COLAs. That's what we're trying to do here, right? Okay, but, you know, when, it still has tax implications, so everybody's got to be aware of the fact that, you know, as much as we'd like 0 tax increases, it's just not possible.
Steve?
I'm sorry, this may be being repeated, but what fiscal years is this for? Which 3?
The upcoming 3 fiscal years.
20, 21, 22?
Right, same as the BMA,
Thank you.
BMEA contract.
All right. Anything further?
Just a quick one. So we talked about this a little bit earlier yesterday. I just want to make sure I understand. In general, you mentioned on at least one of the contracts that or tables that the step increases are roughly 4% apart. Does that tend to be true on most of the tables?
The 2 where we added the step, they are.
Okay. All right. So, and there's roughly like 13 steps or so. So the point is, during those, and this just in the spirit of Phil, this is sort of an editorial comment. I sort of mentally take exception to the term COLA because the real increase that people are seeing for the first 13 years is really more like 2.5 plus 4% is 6.5%. So mentally, I know when I first looked at this stuff, it's like, gee, 2.5% is below inflation. This is a really good deal. But the reality is that these increases are 6.5% per year for at least 13 years versus 3% inflation, which is a good place to be if you're getting it.
I think when you have salary scales and union, that's how it is. We call it the social contract because you get someone when they're fairly new doing it, and no matter how good they are at it, they get paid that amount and grow at that amount until they get to the top.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. That'd be nice. Okay. Is that forgetting? Is there a motion? Do we have a motion? So moved. And seconded? All in favor of 77,891 from collective negotiated settlement for the, yeah, okay.
DPW.
DPW. All in favor, opposed, abstaining, 10-0-0. Great, thank you. And we have one item from the special town meeting warrant, discussing, or the proposal to accept the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Fund. David, you have a intro for this?
I do. Last but not least, Jim.
Great.
We started our day together, we might as well end it.
Yeah, well, it started at 8 in the morning.
So you used to say years ago in Boston, it's only half a day, Frank.
More than half, right?
Yeah.
Let me just first start. So this is part of the special town meeting that you would have all received the package on. Within that special parliament meeting booklet, there was an Article 1. That article is being withdrawn. This was an article that we had previously voted on back in September of last year, which was for allowing the selectmen the ability to negotiate on one of the affordable units on South Bedford Street. So we've already appropriated the funds for that through that town meeting in September. That is coming to fruition. Purchase price is $150,000 on it, but that article is being withdrawn for that purpose.
Thank you.
So Article 2 is the establishment of a municipal affordable housing trust fund. So I've written down some notes, I'll kind of go through them. Currently, the town, as part of their affordable housing funds, have segregated their account, their funds on the books, which means it is restricted. It's a restricted account, but it's to be used for affordable housing-related items, like this purchase of 117 South Bedford that we're going through. The fund currently has about $400,000 in the account, which has been accumulated over time on various projects that we've done where money has gone into it. We're again have agreed to spend up to $250 out of that. Right now, there's currently $400 in it.
Who controls that money? Sorry, Mr. Chair. I just want to know who controls that money.
So the way it is set up right now, it's a restricted account that the selectmen oversee, but town meeting has to approve the use of the funds for specific affordable housing.
Okay.
The opening of Corporate Drive, which was the friendly 40B, the developer, as part of that approval process, has agreed to write the town a check for $600,000 to be used for their affordable housing needs. And that's what kind of brought this in to this scope, because we're going to be getting 600 in. We've already got 400 in. Our affordable housing account could have then upwards of $1 million in. 100 cities and towns have established affordable housing trust fund as the way for them to manage their affordable housing dollars. That's the way that's the way the 100 towns have felt the best way to operate and maintain and utilize the funds is through this trust fund. The board is comprised of 5 or more appointed individuals that generally will be on a term not to exceed 2 years, generally appointed by the Board of Selectmen. But again, it touches various parts of the community, whether it be town meeting, whether it be Ways and Means, whether it be planning board, what have you. But the trust is set up with this group, whose charge is funding opportunities or what have you for affordable housing opportunities. Currently, the town does have an affordable housing committee, and they're working on logistics of not only who's going to be comprised on the board or the trust, but how the committee will continue to work with, which is really kind of looking at affordable housing as a whole, and this trust fund, which will be in charge of spending the money. Ultimately, again, the big thing, what we're approving is by setting up this trust fund, it takes the authority out of the hands of town meeting as far as being able to, being the governing body to spend the money within the fund to this trust fund board. They would be the decision makers. So by setting up and establishing this autonomous board, they'll have the accountability, the control, the oversight in all aspects of affordable housing in the town of Burlington. And with a fund that has now possibly up to $1 million in it, or less because we're going to be buying the unit, but we're going to get it at that point. We're going to have assets of over $1 million. They'll be, again, in charge of kind of that oversight. By having a trust fund and having the decision makers within there, they can be proactive in making decisions on all affordable housing options, whether that be, applying for grants, direct line of communications with decision makers. Again, they are going to be that autonomous board for affordable housing questions and other areas to look at. The negative impact, as I said, and what we wrestled with, is the fact that right now, town meeting is the one that approves deals if money is to be spent out of that. So we are taking control away from town meeting's hands and putting it into that board's hands. And that, as part of our discussion, was viewed as a negative standpoint. So with the formation of the new, so ultimately, we had a split decision in our subcommittee. We did vote 1-1. I was the vote in favor. I think the formation of this new entity, the appointments for various trustees from different parts of town, and having direct accountability and oversight by regulatory institutions of the trust fund, which will be looked at, by our outside overseers. I think having a specific group added and focused for the specific needs of increased opportunities for the creation of programs or getting grants for affordable housing, where now it may be done on a secondary means. You're going to have a board that's really looking at that and charged with that specific request as far as the community as a whole and what opportunities are there. Seems to be, and it seems like 100 other communities have also felt that this was a good charge. So again, we voted 1-1 on this article as a whole. And I don't know, Frank.
Want to comment, Frank, or do you?
Well, I was a sticky wicket on this one. That should be pretty obvious by now. So as liberal as I am, Tom, I actually had some concerns. My primary concern, in fact, my only concern, is that it does take the spending authority from a town meeting warrant, essentially, to a board of trustees that are on a 2-year basis. They're appointed, and their meetings are public and all of that, but that was my primary worry about it. I actually think all of the points that David made about the good things about it, focus, more money's involved in this thing now, so there's a lot more they can do, maybe better direction to the whole thing, is all good. I was just concerned about the spending authority is no longer with town meeting. And I have very mixed feelings about it. Also, since my vote, there was a letter or an email that Jim sent out, kind of giving a little more input to the necessity to do this. And it has everything to do with how 40Bs are looked at and how people that are going to give monies to the town feel about getting involved in this. Getting involved in a deal where they're going to be putting up front money, big money. It doesn't happen very often. It's pretty rare. I can't remember in my whole lifetime in town government seeing $600,000 come our way in one swat. The only thing that came close was the Grandview sales of units. So that was it. And I think town meeting needs to decide if they want to put it in the hands of Mass General Law. The governance is very good, you got it, and a board of trustees, the seats are rotated, I believe, every 2 years, I think. So I would like to have seen a way where town meeting could still keep its oar in the water, but that may be awkward, and it could be, because we don't meet that often, so. But I do stick with my vote.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question first, and I'll admit I didn't have time to delve into all the materials on this, but I did see something that suggested that if we were to move forward with a Community Preservation Act, that those monies would, or potentially would also go into this trust?
No, I don't think so.
I definitely saw that referenced, and
Some have chosen to do that.
some have chosen to do it, and so I guess I would suggest that, and I think folks who are talking at that might be like $1 million a year or something on that order, at least some interesting amount. And if one were to have this trust, it would seem like a natural place to put it if you in for a penny, in for a dollar. So we're talking some real money flowing through this trust, I guess, is the point, or potentially even more. So my first reaction is that the reason you would do this is if you're getting into a lot of situations with affordable housing and related matters that are extremely time-sensitive, where waiting for the next, waiting, 4 months for the next town meeting is a deal breaker, that could be a concern. My sense is that the kinds of things that we're doing that this trust would be funding aren't highly time-sensitive, so waiting for town meeting isn't really an issue there. In terms of the doing, you mentioned a lot of things about, working on grants and so forth and evaluating opportunities. It seems to me that all those things could be done without having the spending authority of being trustees and, directing where the money goes. I mean, if you could have the same group of people appointed by the Board of Selectmen, could be writing grants, could be evaluating opportunities, so on, and still have the final spending authority with town meeting. So I guess overall, I would say my first reaction to it seems like we have more money in this category that we need to think about how we're spending. My first reaction isn't, let's have a smaller number of people doing it since all of a sudden we have more money involved. In fact, it would be the complete opposite. I would say, given that there's no obvious time-sensitive nature, go with the wisdom of crowds, for lack of a better term, and keep it with town meeting. I don't see why any benefit to consolidating the decision-making authority on, $1 million a year or whatever the number ends up being. So I would be against this, as at least with the information that's been given so far.
Phil?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Frank. We have a legislative body for a reason, which is for the appropriation of our finances, and I think any dilution of that power is not a good thing. And secondarily, the timing is not an issue. We can have a town meeting within 7 to 14 days, as you witnessed by the special town meeting that we're having on the 20th. So time is not an issue. This can be put together at a moment's notice. So I would be in favor if we retain the legislative body as the appropriating authority. If not, then I would not be in favor.
I think it's an interesting concept. I don't feel like I have a grasp of where we are in our affordable housing need and our stock and how we manage that, and so I just feel ignorant. And I also think that I read the backup, and it seems like we're jumping from this Chapter 2 in the table of contents, which is figure out if a trust can help your community, and then we're jumping straight to Chapter 5 of establishing the trust. And there's 3 other chapters in there about defining the trust and figuring out how it all. So I just think we need more groundwork if we're going to do this, and I'm very uncomfortable with taking it away from town meeting.
Dave?
I did have one question around where we were, and that was specifically around the percentage for 40B, because I know we have to stay above that 10% limit, and we've been teetering around it for year over year. So I'm wondering, A, does this help that ratio? And B, what is our current ratio at this point?
With this development, when it's finished, did you want the 270 units, because in a 40B, you count all units, even though 25% are affordable, but you get to count all 270. We will be at slightly over 13%. So for right now, we're kind of safe harbor, if you will. But after you finish your dialogue, I'm trying to follow along some of the questions and comments, and I'd just like to briefly respond to some of them.
Sure.
Tom, do you want him to do his thing first and then ask you a
You
question?
can do his thing first.
Yeah, why don't you give us your perspective on this?
I guess just a couple of things. So, as David mentioned, well, first I'd like to just say, the one thing I think we all did agree with on the room, and Frank and David both summarized it well, at the end of the day, I'll speak for myself, we're hired help, okay? And you are elected officials, and I am a big believer in town meeting. I was a town meeting member for 25 years, and I respect the legislative body, and we're not trying to per se take something away from them for the sake of taking it away. But I do believe that's a policy decision that town meeting, as well as other officials, should engage in, and then, you know, they direct that policy to us. Having said that, I'll provide a little guidance for you guys to think about. About 109 communities have done this, created these trust funds, so we're not unique. Of the 109, 98 of them chose this mechanism to use. So that's something. Quickly, entry to market, it is time sensitive. It could be time sensitive. It may not be time sensitive. But in the backup, I'm not going to read you all the various quotes, but there's some good quotes in there from people who have walked this path. Andover has a great story to tell how it was very, very helpful from a time-sensitive standpoint to make it happen. Another planner from Andover also chimed in on the town meeting. They used to have to go to town meeting and request the funds. Even though they don't have to do that now, they do that purposely to make sure everybody's vested in this. Quickly, regarding the potential for duplicity with two committees, basically what a lot of communities have done, these trust funds are set up as solely a funding entity, and your affordable housing committee, task force, whatever you want to call it, is charged with trying to deal with all of the housing type functions. So there's kind of a checks and balances there as well that goes along with it. So, and lastly, to the extent the 2020 census comes around, which is one of the components of doing that math to figure out where you are, Winchester just went through it, and what they did is they implemented a housing production plan. If that's implemented, you need to have a trust fund like this set up as well. I also spoke to an attorney who represents and did actually represent Corporate Drive here. Someone referred to him earlier, Mr. Buckley, and he works in a lot of other communities. He too, having nothing to do with this particular deal, but just from a general sense, believes this is the way to go. Again, he wasn't chiming in on policy decision. He was solely talking about the mechanism that we could utilize. Having said all that, as I mentioned at the outset of my comments, I'm here just to provide some information, not necessarily sway you one way or another. I truly believe it's a policy decision. And the last thing I would say, I get the site for the chapter. It may appear that we're going from A to Z, but I can assure you, in between the two letters, there's been a lot of thought, there's been a lot of discussion, there's been a lot of housing. We're part of, well, we are, through the end of this fiscal year, part of a consortium, and the person in charge of that, Liz Russ, I also communicated with and got a lot of input on this, and again, from a housing standpoint, it's the way to go. Frank said it, and we knew it coming in the room. Well, when we kicked off the initial discussion, there were two critical elements of this. One we've talked about here tonight. Do you take it from town meeting? Do you put it in there? And two, the composition. We haven't talked about that yet, but if you got there, the composition of the trustees. Let's face it, it's all about power. It's all about control. That's what people focus on, and that's where the conversation ultimately is gonna, you know, creates people's security or lack thereof of confidence and things like that. Again, that's a decision for way above my pay grade, I guess. So I'll let the policymakers go there.
All right, David?
Yeah, so just to reiterate, so I guess, you know, again, the committee, question is, I think bottom line is how much emphasis we want to put on affordable housing in town. All we've cared about is, what's the percentage? Are we at the 10%? Are we worried about a 40B coming in and taking over that? Okay? So that's a big number, but that's really not what's involved in this. We haven't had a lot of money. We've done projects over the years that have brought money into towns that could be utilized for affordable housing opportunities. But quite frankly, we haven't done a lot ourselves except making sure that our number hit the bogey, right? So now we've got a new project, a friendly 40B that came in, that gave us, because of that project, gave the town a significant opportunity, raised another 600,000. So it's going to bring it up over 900,000, or $1 million if you include the property we're going to buy back. Now we get an opportunity to do something, because you've got some money, you've got abilities to do things and to be proactive in affordable housing. Now, you can continue to say, well, let's just put the money aside, and if something comes up down the road, we deal with it at that point. Or you do like a lot of other communities have done, and say, let's get people that are motivated and interested in promoting affordable housing in the town, looking at opportunities, looking at grants, looking at dilapidated houses that you might be able to work a deal where we can create some stock and save one person, or maybe influence some other people that couldn't afford to stay in the town, but you might be able to assist them in a way to do it. You get proactive in being able to support affordable stock in the town. We haven't had to do that, and we haven't focused on it all because we've had our bogey. So this trust fund is established, so yes, it's taking opportunity away from town meeting to be involved in every decision-making as it involves this account. Now, again, this account is only there because developers, as part of their approval process, said, we want to promote affordable housing in town, that's why we're building this, that's why we're giving you the money. Just like other departments where, and again, I don't know if this is the same, but you have other civic benefactors that say, we want to contribute to the COA in a certain way, and COA can use that money for their purpose, and town meeting isn't approving those, right? So here's a money that's been raised through developers' desire and our negotiations in being able to make sure that Burlington stays affordable, not just hits the bogey so we don't have to worry about 40Bs coming in, but promotes affordable housing in town. And I think this autonomous board, who's charged with certain avenues, that's made up and comprised of various people within the town that's appointed, not just one group that only cares about certain things, and they're only on the board for a short period of time. I think that board is going to be more energetic and more enthusiastic about the promotion of affordable housing than, yeah, great, we got 600, we'll put in the account. If something else comes up or another house that we might have to bid on that's coming off our stock comes in, we'll deal with it at that time. You're not doing much to promote affordable housing. So that's why I think it's a good thing and why a lot of towns, 100 towns have done it.
Do you have a comment on that? Or?
I just wanted to follow up with, I forgot one point. Regarding CPA, just very quickly, CPA, by the statute, you will have a CPA committee if the town ever does adopt that. And the CPA, as I think someone mentioned, some communities have gone either way. Some can funnel that money to a trust fund like that. Many do the standalone, the CPA. Keep in mind, CPA is being money raised through the general fund essentially. And in those particular cases, what a lot of communities have done is they've kept the authority with the CPA funds, and CPA still goes to town meeting because it's coming from the general fund versus this, which David mentioned. These are outside kind of funds coming in. So I just wanted to clarify. I didn't want you to think I forgot your point.
Thank you.
All right, Tom.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the thought process is a good idea. I think we definitely need not only affordable housing, but we need more better senior housing in this town that's affordable. But it's funny, in all the conversation, Frank and Dave, is why is the Burlington Housing Authority not even being discussed in this thing? Their name's not even being mentioned. Aren't they there for that reason? Whose name?
So there is a committee that has responsibility for these kinds of activities in the town. And I don't know, maybe this is the elephant in the closet, but one would ask if you want to have a more proactive level of creating and making available affordable housing beyond just let's make sure that we don't fall under the 40B penalty. You might ask yourself, why don't we do more with that committee? And I think that's a valid question. I don't even know, they may not be as unengaged as we're implying here. I just don't really know. So that's one comment that I would make. I don't know that much about it. We did talk about it a little bit.
I think his reference was to, though, the Burlington Housing Authority, if I heard you correctly.
Right.
Right.
Highly different than the Affordable Housing Committee.
Right.
So they both
Separate
exist.
legal.
Well, their
separate
charter-
legal- Go ahead.
Well, their charter is to run the housing authority, to run the units that they have. They're an operating entity. I don't think necessarily they're a
So do
policy
they have the
entity.
opportunity to do the kinds of things that David's suggesting to, pioneer, prospect, and
It's not in their charter.
make more available?
I think you're blending apples and oranges. That's a state, I'm not an expert on affordable housing, but that's a state-sanctioned operation, if you will, having nothing to do, and I'll defer to the accountant here, in terms of nothing other than name really to do with the town of Burlington as a government entity. So, two distinct, I don't even believe you could commingle funds or anything like that to try to, but, let's keep in mind, they have properties. They have a vacant piece of property over on Adams Street, big parcel over there just before Lexington. So, they have the opportunity. I will speak on behalf of, I'll speak for myself as Affordable Housing Coordinator and as, the chair of the Housing Committee. We would love to work with them to help, synergy as best we could. We work with anyone. I'll leaving here this afternoon, before I came back up, I got a phone call from someone in Arlington, where I used to live, and I've been involved for a long time, and they said, hey, I was sitting in town meeting Monday night, a little bored, and I was just going through some things. How come the Arlington Housing, whatever it's called, but Arlington Housing Group, not the Housing Authority, but the Housing Partnership, Arlington Housing Partnership, how come they're advertising Burlington affordable units on their website? I said, well, that's because we have this one here, we're putting it out. We have preference, but they're putting it out to the rest of the world because the rest of the world can apply for it as well. So, anybody in this kind of industry, if you will, it's what David said, people, I will just say this, I think I've used the term, I think people on committees like this should be zealots for that cause. You don't get on a committee like that because you want to slow down affordable housing, you want to address the matter. And so, I guess we're all zealots together out there, if you will, for affordable housing. So I think it's a good thing.
So Phil?
Well, we're zealots too on financial matters, and
Yes.
just from a financial standpoint strictly, forgetting the social policy, this is somewhat counterintuitive in that 60% or two-thirds of our value is from residential housing, and the more of the affordable stuff we put up is a reduction of our potential revenue sources. And also, it is, it's a key to higher densities. In order to accomplish this, you must have higher densities, and that's how the friendly 40B came in. Look, 10 years ago, would we have approved that project with that kind of density in that location? Absolutely not. And now, as a result of state legislation, we're required to do that. So, it's not going to be long before we have many more of those projects in any event.
All right, I guess I've got some questions and comments too. So if this gets approved as just 2 lines in the warrant, it's, the selectmen start putting together the committee and it's set up. But in reading through the backup material, it described a whole number of things that should be figured out, like the relationship of this committee to other committees. Do they have, do they sort of suddenly have some kind of ownership of zoning regulations as opposed to affordable housing? Do they have, it's hard to imagine they have a very narrow scope based on just money, but if they're really going to be effective to do affordable housing, then they need to have a very broad scope in terms of zoning and influence with the planning commission. It's hard to imagine that the planning body will give up any responsibilities there. I agree, it sounds, I mean, having a dedicated board that actually is focused on affordable housing is a good thing, I think, but I don't know how it interacts with everything else. The master plan had spent a lot of time talking about housing and how we needed more diversity in housing. So I'm not sure it's entirely, completely clear in the interests of Burlington to only go for high-end housing, because we need people in town, who live in town, who can afford to work in town.
Yeah,
Or
approve
vice
some
versa.
three families.
So,
Send a bunch of parcels for three families.
anyway, so the bunch of, I think to move the whole thing forward, we need not just management of some funds, but we need policy choices and advocates for those policy choices.
I envision this, you described yourself, and I believe, in a tongue-in-cheek type way as I did, that you guys are finance zealots. I think this, if you read through some of this, it talks about a financing entity, and they should be zealots. And every board and commission and everybody or anyone who in the town who is interested in it should want to get to know the ultimate trustees of this and be able to understand, and it should be well vetted in terms of what the expectations are, that this is a long-term thing. I just want to comment because people get a little nervous with big, dollars being laid around here. $400,000, I've been with the town 10 years, actually very soon. And I don't think that balance has changed substantially in 10 years, okay? And it wouldn't change as of today or next week, till we spend $150,000 to acquire the property. The $600,000, as David said, we may not see for another 20 or 30 years. So again, I don't view this as this big pot of gold that's going to continue to grow. The house over there, the 150, we'll get back. The house has to be totally renovated, there's going to be other expenditures. And I think where you start looking at things like this as an example and what kind of drives you forward, and I agree with all your points, that all of those things will be vetted out as you go through establishing this, but I don't think it's reasonable to suggest that all of those things should be totally vetted and done before it's adopted. I think a lot of things are passed in a framework, and these are very tight frameworks. It's not like somebody's going to go off the reservation and set this thing up differently. There's a checks and balances in there, and there's 9 people up to, it can even be more than that, but it certainly has to be a minimum of 5. I think inclusivity is good. It sounds like a lot of you, which I appreciate, have looked through the backup. They talk about how they came up with maybe you want a representative of the planning board or somebody from the ZBA. Right now, we're a very forward-thinking town because whoever put that Affordable Housing Committee together have those type people. We have a representative from ZBA. We have Ernie Covino from the planning. We have other people on that, and we regularly interact with other boards. That will certainly continue. The planning director from Andover, I mean, this is, like politics 101, to be honest with you. It's a great bureaucratic document that was put out of 28 pages that you guys have all read. Probably most of us could have dealt with it in 7 pages maybe, but it is what it is. And I'm not saying it's wasteful or anything. It's insightful, but I would just caution that I wouldn't get lost in all that minutia, and that will be well vetted, and I would suggest to you that both the Board of Selectmen and the Affordable Housing Committee would have a lot of public discussion before anything's hammered away. But again, policy decision up to
All right.
someone else.
Anything else? I guess, can I have a motion to support or not?
Would you entertain an amendment? That we would support?
You can propose anything you want. What-
Well, I would just suggest that, great idea, but can we amend it to include that town meeting has the final authority on the expenditure of the money?
I don't know how a trust fund can be set up where a governing body is the town of Berlin.
I don't know how that interacts with adopting.
trust.
I mean, the warrant article says adopt state law, right, by section and group.
It says adopt state law. I will say, in full disclosure, and I just gave you my view of the 28-page document, there was some oblique reference to in there. There was some community, I don't know if it was Medfield or somewhere, that actually has something or reference something. I'd have to try to find it.
There was
Do you
something.
recall?
There was one town meeting did retain authority approval for expenditure.
Yeah, I would suggest to you that, oh, I don't want to comment.
All right,
Yeah.
Frank.
So if you, I may not be reading this correctly, but in page, I don't know, some page here.
3 of 8 if you printed it,
There
but-
we go. The powers of the board, all of which shall be carried out in furtherance of the purposes set forth, blah, blah, blah. But a city or town may, by ordinance or bylaw, omit or modify any of these powers, and may grant to the board additional powers consistent with this section. So I believe there's a mechanism in the Mass General Law that would make it possible for us to have a bylaw rider on this that would say certain expenditures require a town meeting vote. I think it's possible to do that. I also think, well, let me just leave it at that. I think there's more going on here that I'm just ready to bite off, but you mentioned something that you went over very quickly, which was this, it was in Buckley's email about a production plan.
Yeah, I referenced it earlier tonight as well, housing production plan.
Right, so if we needed to do something, or wanted to do something like that, the implication of his input, which was kind of legal in nature, was that it would require this trust be in place to have the ability to execute a production plan,
Correct.
which I believe is all about an initiative to create more affordable housing.
Well,
By
I
the
want
town.
to state two things. Any information in that email was based on my verbal conversation with Mr. Buckley.
And he responded to you. Yeah.
But anything written in there were my interpretations of our conversation. He did not express any legal advice to me. It was,
All right.
so, I don't want to mince words, I just don't want to.
Point well taken, yeah. So I just don't feel like I don't feel like I know enough to even know what I'm getting into here.
That's fine. I mean, whatever you guys do, but.
Well, I would offer that
Well-
amendment.
The housing production plan.
What's that?
I would offer that amendment. The proviso at the end of the bottom of whatever the warrant article, that the town meeting would have the ultimate appropriation authority.
Yeah, we're gonna need legal input on that.
Yeah. Well, anything that's passed goes to the Attorney General anyway, so he'll review it from a state law standpoint.
Well, I think we're going to have legal
Shield.
input before it can be proposed at town meeting, but, right? That's what I would expect. we'd
I
want
would
to try to do.
suspect, I mean, I'm kind of hearing it live, and I guess my initial reaction to it is almost like, what's the real benefit? Because you're really adding an additional layer, having the trust fund, and almost like, why bother? You know what I mean?
I would withdraw the amendment then, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I'm sorry?
I'll withdraw that amendment.
Okay,
Motion to approve as written.
is it written in the warrant?
Second.
All in favor? 2, 3, 4, opposed? 2, 3, 4, 5, okay. Abstaining? What did I say? 4, 5, 0. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate all your input.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate all your
Thank you.
input.
Sorry, it sounds kind of flip, but
Peace.
I appreciate all the background of the discussion.
Thanks for working 14 hours
That's right.
a day.
All right, the last thing I mailed around last night was minutes for April 24th. Are people prepared to vote on that? If so, are there any editorial, any updates? Any corrections?
See that for just a second. Actually, it was one.
Actually, I had one question, which, there was a mention, as Joellen took notes, about the funding of the fireworks for the 4th of July as being funded by the town. And my general understanding was that, in fact, fireworks have been funded by
Chambers, I
commercial.
thought, right?
By commercial, not by the town's contribution.
It's a
Okay,
commercial entity.
I'll correct that. Because that's something I would rather have somebody else fund than the town for fireworks.
Yeah, but it's, what is it, $5,000? I mean,
I think what's
everybody in the
confusing-
town goes. It's almost like 20 cents a person.
I think what's confusing about the way she says it is that there's two $20,000 numbers, and so it's not clear which $20,000 she's mentioning, because I think the total appropriation is 40. We're going to split 20,000 with contributions and 20 with,
Right.
so that, I think that's,
I
Well,
think the
it's-
appropriation is 20,
No.
we're expecting matching funds.
right, that's what I'm saying.
Well, I would even say it differently, right? There are donations.
Right.
And then the town is contributing 20,000.
That's just.
They
Half
said
of
that
the
the
zone.
towns had mostly covered the police details.
Right.
Fire and all the,
But when she says it's included in the 20,000, the way that it's worded, you don't know which 20,000 she's referring to.
Okay.
But it's
I don't
coming
think
out of
it
the bucket.
matters.
So ultimately, the 4th of July parade is costing 40 grand. We're
Right.
giving 20.
Right.
Corporations are giving 20.
Yeah.
And this, it's funding the parade and fireworks.
Okay.
Which pocket it's coming out of.
With that correction, can we vote on it?
Motion to approve?
Second, all in favor of the minutes of April 24th? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. Opposed, abstaining, 900.
Motion to adjourn?
I'll accept that. Thank you, Tom.
we should say thank you, happy birthday to Sonia Brown. She's not here tonight.
Oh, it's her birthday?
She didn't say that's why she wouldn't be here.
That's why she.
You tell Sonia, I don't know how she can sit in this chair, because it
Actually-
sinks about 2 inches every 30 seconds, and I'm constantly going like this.
So,
29, right?
That's right, 29th birthday, yeah.
before we actually adjourn, I think we have covered everything we have to do on the operating and the warrants.
We
As
have
far as I
no
know,
open
we have
items
no
that I know
open
of. Does anyone have an open?
Beautiful thing, Mr. Chairman, well done.
So, congratulations and thank you.
I want to give some of the free cash back to the taxpayers.
You said that before, too.
So as a point, you will have to get together to redo this where we actually ended up, right? In terms of the percent, the guideline versus what we ended up with. We're over guideline, right?
But we are only over guideline in the ways that we anticipated we were over guideline.
That we voted for.
That we voted.
Right, right.
Celtics are down by 18, by the way, at the end of the third.
Just worry about
Alright.
the Bruins.
So,
Think they're coming back?
Motion.
motion to adjourn is
Wait,
approved.
wait,
All in
I-
favor?
Aye.
Oh, I was gonna make a motion